Halloween is already a scary time of year, but most of the time it's all about fun disguises, tricks, and treats. However, in this case, Halloween brought a real-life nightmare. Real monsters truly walk among us, disguising themselves as people who care. And that's scarier than any fictional tale because these monsters really exist. I want to introduce you to Rebekah Jane Gay, the youngest child of Thomas and Sally Gay. Let me tell you about them first, so you'll know how Rebekah came along. Thomas Gay was raised in Buny City, Michigan, and became a certified welder working for the union. He met Sally Kelly, and they got married on April 3rd of 1976 in Flushing, Michigan. Just 2 years later, in June of 1978, the couple welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Deborah. Then, 2 years after she arrived, they welcomed a son in July of 1980, James W. Gay, who was named after his paternal grandfather. 4 years after that, in July of 1984, they had another son they named Aaron Jacob. Finally, 4 years after Aaron came into the world, it was Rebekah Jane Gay's turn, on March 26th of 1988. Her name is spelled like the Rebecca in the Bible, Rebekah. Both her parents were followers of God and devoted to their faith. Rebekah's father, Thomas, was highly respected in their community and well known for his knowledge and expertise in riding, handling, and training horses. He considered everyone he met a friend and was even one of the original founding members of the St. Jude's Ride. This is a horseback riding event that raises money for St. Jude's Children's Hospital. He was also known to have great compassion for both humans and animals. Thomas was also a sponsor and supporter of the Wounded Warrior Project, and he set a very good example for his children, instilling his values in them and raising them in a family that emphasized togetherness, faith, and hard work. Rebekah, who was affectionately known as Beckaboo, experienced a childhood rooted in the simplicity of small-town living, filled with moments that reflected her innocence and joy. Growing up in Midland, she enjoyed the security of a small community where everyone knew each other. Her childhood was spent playing with her siblings, attending church with her family, and developing friendships that would last a lifetime. From an early age, Rebekah was known for her gentle nature and compassionate spirit, traits that would define her throughout her entire life. Though Rebekah and her older sister were many years apart, they had a very strong bond, and so did the girls and their mother, Dada Boss. Rebekah got older. She was known as someone who was always there when you needed support, someone who listened intently and offered comfort in times of need. She had a unique ability to make others feel seen and heard, qualities that made her well-liked and remembered in both her family and social circles. There was also her laugh and her kindness that stood out to others, and people who met Rebekah often commented on her natural beauty, her shiny blonde hair and big blue eyes. But it was actually her inner beauty that made an impression once you got to know her. Now, I'm not sure exactly when Rebekah's father became terminally ill, but sadly Thomas was diagnosed with an incurable disease. The family eventually made the heartbreaking decision to move him into a hospice care facility so he could get around-the-clock support that he needed to be comfortable. They chose a hospice called Tony and Trisha's House in Auburn, Michigan. It's not considered the normal care facility. Instead, it's like a home where patients are supported in a caring social environment. These little houses have spaces for guests. They have spacious kitchens, a common area, a living room, a chapel, and even laundry facilities. As hard as it was, the family knew Thomas would be getting his needs met by professionals, while his family could enjoy his company before he passed. Rebekah attended Bullock Creek High School in Midland, and she was a member of the equestrian team, following her father's footsteps. She also volunteered for the school's archery shoot, which was to raise money for families in need who needed help making ends meet. Rebekah was known as the quiet but pretty girl, and I'm doing air quotes, because she was someone that people would remember, even if they saw her once, because of the way that she looked. So it's no surprise that after graduating in 2007, she decided to pursue a career in the beauty industry and enrolled at In-Session School of Cosmetology. Around the same time, her father was still very ill and in hospice, and things were lonely for her mother, Sally, who wasn't used to being by herself without a partner. She started to join some online dating sites to fill the void that she felt in her life, hoping that maybe, at the very least, she could find someone to talk to make her feel less isolated, because her children were all adults and moving out on their own now, having their own lives to compete. This time, Rebekah was dating a guy named Chad Sando, and they had quite a serious relationship. The two of them made a gorgeous match, physically speaking. He had the long, shaggy brown hair, blue eyes, and one of those baby faces. During this time, Rebekah had finished her cosmetology program, and she started working at BSC's hair care salon as a stylist in Mount Pleasant, which was close to where her mother Sally lived. Sally had moved into a mobile home in the Broomfield Valley Mobile Home Park, and she finally met someone. His name was John White, and they started corresponding long distance because he was living in Augusta, Michigan at the time, which was about a 2-hour drive away. But he recently moved in with Sally, and he was working as a pastor at a church nearby where Sally taught Sunday school. It was called Christ Community Fellowship. They enjoyed each other's companionship, and they had a lot in common, especially with their beliefs and interests as Christians. It is packed into about 8 square miles, and its population was just under 20,000 people. It was pretty tight-knit, other than students who moved into Isabella County to attend nearby Central Michigan State. Most of the area is quite rural. There are a lot of outdoor activities, local festivals, farmers markets, a very welcoming environment. Definitely a relaxed pace, especially around where Sally lived in Broomfield, 20 minutes outside Mount Pleasant. Over there it was even more rural, with a lot of scenic farmland. It's just a nice, quiet area to raise a family. Speaking of family, soon there would be a new addition because around 2008, Rebekah found out she was pregnant. When the baby came along, she and Chad did their best to make things work. But for many young couples, it can be a very challenging time. Unfortunately, they did not work out as a romantic couple, but being a mother changed Rebekah's life. Her son Conway was her world. He was her everything. From that point forward, she was focused on creating the best life possible for him. Even though she and Chad hadn't worked out, they were both dedicated to making co-parenting a priority. They worked together to ensure their son had a stable, loving environment. Now, with Rebekah needing a lot more help, she decided to rent a mobile home in the same community where her mother lived, in Broomfield Valley Mobile Home Park. Now I know that some people, not all people, but some people, are quick to judge when they hear trailer or mobile home. But I have to say I've seen quite a few of these, and especially recently, they can be quite cozy. I saw this one for rent in the exact same community that Sally and Rebekah lived in. It was very spacious, with all the things you would need, especially if you were just getting on your feet as a single mom, like Rebekah was. She felt safe knowing that her mom was close by. She liked her landlord, who was renting the space to her, and she knew all of her neighbors from coming over and visiting her mom and John all the time. It was perfect having Sally and John as a support system just a street away. This was very helpful for Rebekah. Soon they were spending almost every night together, with John cooking them dinner and, of course, doting on her son, Conway. John liked the idea of having a built-in family, and he stepped up as a father figure to Rebekah and a grandfather figure to Conway, often helping to drop him off at daycare or even assisting Rebekah by bringing Conway to the drop-off exchanges with her ex, Chad. They had a meeting place at the Mount Pleasant Meyer grocery store and would typically meet up on Wednesday mornings. Now by this time, the long hours at the salon were not practical, so Rebekah got a job at a Goodwill retail store in Mount Pleasant, just 15 minutes away from her home. Sally, John, Conway, and Rebekah settled into a nice, stable routine. Rebekah welcomed and accepted John into her family, and because of her compassionate nature, it was very easy for John to accept Rebekah as well. For example, there was a time when John got very sick. He had a really bad cold, and Rebekah would make him soup. She would check on him, bring him pizza, and in turn, John was always helpful when Rebekah needed a helping hand with Conway. Rebekah was just a very loving person, a great mother. She would read to Conway every night. Most of the time, they were Bible stories, the same ones she grew up reading. Plus, Sally was a Sunday school teacher, so she had a lot of experience with kids and enjoyed caring for Conway as well. From the moment that Conway was born, he was immensely loved. Rebekah made everything fun and special for him. She was so happy, even when things weren't perfect. She would talk about how much she adored her little family, which soon included a new man, Aaron Quinn. She met Aaron when Conway was only about 1 year old. Aaron's sister, Andrea, worked with Rebekah at Goodwill, and they formed a very close friendship. So she was so happy when Rebekah and Aaron started dating. The pair got along really well, and of course, Aaron accepted Conway into his world like he was his own son. Soon, Rebekah and Conway were spending time with Aaron's mother, Lisa, and his sisters, Teresa and Andrea. Teresa thought that Rebekah was so kind and nice, with a voice as gentle and soft as an angel. She was a very sweet girl. They had never seen their brother so happy as he was until he met Rebekah. They truly considered Rebekah part of their family and could tell that Aaron thought that she was the one. Over time, Rebekah was like a sister to Andrea and Teresa, and they would tell their brother, "You better put a ring on it because you don't want her to slip away." She was a great girl, but the couple was taking their time, enjoying each other's company, and doing a lot of activities as a family with Conway. They loved being silly together, taking Conway to new places, experiencing new things, and spending time with Sally as well. It was really important to Rebekah that Conway had positive influences in his life and that he only had good people around him. Conway and Aaron got along so well, her son always came first. She was working so hard, eventually getting promoted to a management position at Goodwill, which included a raise. Rebekah's friends and family often spoke about how motherhood had completely transformed her. Even though she'd always been a caring and responsible person, becoming a mom seemed to bring out an even deeper sense of purpose in Rebekah's life. She balanced her responsibilities at work with the demands of being a single parent, and despite those challenges, Rebekah never complained. She approached every aspect of her life with gratefulness. Her lifestyle may have been modest, but she filled her world with love and warmth, making sure that Conway had everything he needed. As Halloween 2012 approached, Rebekah was especially excited because Halloween was her favorite holiday. This year was particularly special because Conway was now 3 years old. He was at the perfect age to start enjoying the fun of dressing up and going trick-or-treating. There was also a lot to do in their little town, like Papa's Pumpkin Patch and the Trunk or Treat. Rebekah loved costumes. She loved decorating. She had gone to a Halloween store with Conway and Aaron, where they recently took pictures trying on cute sunglasses together. She even went to work dressed like a pirate and had already picked out a Spider-Man outfit for Conway. He was looking more and more like his mama with his long blonde hair and blue eyes. There were so many cute pictures of the two of them being affectionate together, with Conway kissing Rebekah. It was just adorable. You could tell what a strong bond they had. The Goodwill store that Rebekah managed had recently gotten a shipment of scarecrows, and Rebekah bought 8 of them to put in her front yard. She went all out for Halloween, with crime scene tape draped across the windows and the front porch deck. It read, "Enter if you dare." She had spider decorations in another window, pumpkin window clings, a door wrap that said "Happy Halloween," and a pumpkin near the front door. S. Oh, let's jump to October 30th, the night before Halloween, which is known as Devil's Night in Detroit, Michigan. Rebekah was having a relaxing evening, which was the opposite of what the night usually brings in other parts of the state, where pranks and arson take place. Rebekah was having a night in, gearing up for the following day. She had all these exciting plans for herself, Aaron, and Conway. Rebekah liked planning things, and had already set out Conway's Spider-Man costume. Halloween fell on a Wednesday that year, a day when Conway typically spent time with his father, so the next morning he would get to hang out with his dad until Rebekah got off work. Then she and Aaron were going to take Conway trick-or-treating that night. Rebekah talked to her mom on the phone around 10 o'clock. She was telling her how excited she was to get to work the next morning because she was starting to work days. Even though she had to get an early start around 6 a.m., that meant she had the evenings to spend with her son. Conway slept with Rebekah, so they got into bed and said goodnight to Sally, telling her they would see her the next day. Rebekah's mom had no reason to believe that anything was amiss during their phone call that night. Rebekah was her usual happy self and completely focused on her plans for Halloween. Unfortunately, Rebekah's favorite holiday would become a memorable time for her family for all the wrong reasons. Halloween morning, Rebekah's co-worker, Aaron's sister Andrea, received a phone call from her assistant manager asking if she had spoken to Rebekah because she had not shown up for her morning shift yet. Andrea said she instantly got a pit in her stomach because she knew Rebekah. She was never even late for work. Not showing up was even more unusual, and the fact that she hadn't called into work was strange. Even if she was going to be 5 minutes late, she always made sure to call and let her supervisor know. Andrea thought something must have happened, but no one was thinking the worst. They were considering normal explanations. Maybe Conway's dad was late picking him up, or perhaps Rebekah's alarm hadn't gone off, or her phone died or broke. Maybe she was on her way but couldn't let them know. So Andrea called her brother to ask if he had heard from her. Aaron let her know that he had talked to Rebekah a couple of times on the phone the night before, and the last time they spoke was around 1 p.m. She said she was off to bed. At this point, Andrea was concerned. What if Rebekah had gotten in an accident? What if something happened to Conway? She quickly called her assistant manager back and asked him if he would mind driving over to Rebekah's house since he was closer to check on her. He said, "Andrea, I don't even know what mobile home Rebekah lives in," and Andrea wasn't sure of the exact lot number either. But she told her assistant manager to look for the trailer with the scarecrows out in front, and with that extra detail, the assistant manager was able to locate Rebekah's home in Broomfield Mobile Home Park. He walked up, knocked on the door, but nobody answered. Her car wasn't in front, so he actually tried to open the front door, but it was locked. He turned around and began driving back to Goodwill, but that's when he spotted something that he thought was odd. He called Andrea back. When she answered, he let her know that they had a problem. He saw Rebekah's vehicle, a light blue 4-door Buick, parked at a nearby bar called the Barn Door, which was only about 100 yards away from Rebekah's house. It was actually in the line of sight. If you were outside on her road, you could see the bar. The bar was on Coldwater Road, the main road you take to enter the road where Rebekah's lot was located. But why would her car be parked over there? It was strange, but it wasn't just where it was parked, it was how it was parked. The car was backed up into these tall pine trees, and some of the branches were actually touching the back window of her car. Remember that this is a small town, so the assistant manager went to the bar and spoke with the owner, who was also related to Rebekah's landlord. "You don't have to keep track of this, I'm just letting you know what happened." He let them know that they were concerned for Rebekah's well-being, and asked if they could contact the landlord, and, at the very least, maybe let them inside so they could look around and make sure that Rebekah wasn't lying on the floor, injured or sick. They couldn't see through the windows with all the decorations up. Meanwhile, Andrea was racing over to Rebekah's, and she and the assistant manager gained entry and began to look around inside Rebekah's home. Now, this is not a big space, so they knew within minutes that she wasn't there. However, right away, Andrea realized that something was amiss. She saw a purse that Aaron had gifted Rebekah sitting on the kitchen table. Now, this was a new purse that he bought for her back in August, and she loved it so much she was still talking about it in October. Andrea knew that Rebekah would not have left home without it, not willingly. While all of this was going on, co-workers of Rebekah started to reach out to Sally and John to find out if they had heard from Rebekah. Sally didn't answer her phone, but they were able to get a hold of John, who came right outside and met with the neighbors, who all had gathered in front of Rebekah's house. They informed John that she had not shown up for work, and he immediately got a hold of her mother. Neither of them said they had any idea where she could be, but they were both obviously concerned, especially Sally. When John told her that one of the neighbors said that Rebekah wasn't at work and her car was found next door, she quickly raced over there, with a bad feeling in her gut. She knew something had happened to her daughter and began praying for Rebekah's safety. By noon, they had reported Rebekah missing to the Isabella County Sheriff's Department. Unfortunately, due to Rebekah being 24 years old, she was an adult, and they actually frustratingly wanted to wait until 4:30. That was when Rebekah was due to meet her ex, Chad, to do the exchange of Conway. If she didn't show up to get her son, then they would start a search for her, which I think is a complete waste of valuable time. That's 4.5 hours that could have been used to gather information, look for clues, and hopefully find this poor girl. Her family knew that she wouldn't just leave. She didn't have her purse, her car was parked at a bar, and she was a mother. She would never leave like this. So, Rebekah's loved ones wasted no time. They started searching for her themselves. Right away, they did their best to build out a timeline and reach out to anyone who knew her. Pastor John White reached out to his congregation, who were more than willing to not only pray for Rebekah, but also help look for her. News was spreading through the small community very quickly, and everyone was asking around to see if anyone had any clues to her whereabouts. John raced over to the bar, where 2 staff members, Kathy and Janet, greeted him. He was distraught and told them that Rebekah was missing and that her car was found outside their establishment. Kathy tried to calm John down and let him know that they would ask the employees who were there the night before whether Rebekah had come into the bar. Maybe there was a chance that after she put Conway to bed, she decided to drive over and have a couple of drinks on Devil's Night. But that was not the Rebekah her family knew. Not at all, John waited to hear back from the bar staff. He and Sally did their best not to panic, but it was hard. There just were not any clues to guide them on where to go. All they knew was that morning, everything had been completely normal. It was a Wednesday, so per usual, Conway would need to be taken to the Myers' grocery store parking lot to be picked up by Chad. The store was very close to the Goodwill where Rebekah worked, but because she was now working morning shifts, she couldn't be in 2 places at once. So John and Sally would help out. Like clockwork, John arrived a little before 6:30 that morning while Rebekah was in the bathroom getting ready for work. Conway was usually asleep, and it was no different that morning. John hung out until he woke up, did his normal routine, and then drove him to meet up with Chad. He said nothing was out of the ordinary at all. Rebekah went to work around 6:50 a.m., and John got Conway ready to meet with his dad, Chad. Well, the mention of Chad does raise some red flags. We know that partners, ex-partners, and significant others are always the first ones who need to be ruled out as having anything to do with someone going missing. But John explains that Chad was in a normal mood. He didn't seem upset, and the exchange went over smoothly, as always. But the police weren't so sure. They decided to station a few officers in the Myers parking lot while waiting for Rebekah to show up to get Conway at 4:30 p.m. They also had police at her home, in case she returned, and at the bar waiting to question employees and patrons who were there the night before. Now they couldn't search her home yet because they needed to wait until they had officially filed a missing persons report to obtain a search warrant. But when Rebekah failed to show up to get Conway, the officers sprang into action. The response was immediate, with radios going off one by one with instructions to search her home and car. Isabella County Sheriff Leo Miodusky was assigned to the case, along with Sergeant Gary Green and Detective Sergeant David Patterson. They split up, going to the bar, the car, and Rebekah's house. Let's start with the bar. No one had seen Rebekah come in there the night before. Plus, her car was not outside when they closed down for the night, which was at 8 p.m. on Tuesdays, so she wouldn't have gone over there after speaking with her mom and Aaron because they weren't even open. Tests. Well, that was strange. This was definitely a red flag. The police put out an APB for 24-year-old Rebekah Gay, describing her as a white female, 5 feet 3 inches, about 118 pounds, with curly blonde hair and blue eyes. You might be wondering, wait a minute, curly? I thought she had straight hair. Rebekah usually had pin-straight hair, but she really wanted curls, so she had recently gotten a perm. She was last seen wearing a blue top and black pants. As far as anything unique was concerned, they mentioned she had 3 tattoos. One was a circle of eagle feathers on her upper back, a kiss on one of her hips, and a music clef with the name Conway on her left wrist. Next, let me tell you about what the investigators saw when they did a walkthrough of Rebekah's home. First of all, her purse was open and sitting on the table, and her keys were not inside. They could not find her phone either. It was missing as well. However, there were no signs of forced entry, and everything seemed to be in its place. But then, as they looked even closer, they spotted something. It might not seem like much, but investigators thought there could be more than what meets the eye. In the hallway on the carpet, there was a section that appeared kind of fluffed up, almost like it had been scrubbed. It wasn't lying as flat as the rest of the carpet, so they got an even closer look. It seemed as though someone had tried to clean that area. They examined it under better lighting, and that's when they noticed what could be reddish-brown spots on the carpet that might be blood. Of course, we have Conway. He's a toddler who could have spilled something as well. We know most toddlers are notorious for making messes, but under the circumstances, investigators started really focusing on that hallway. Then, on one of the walls, they spotted a portion that appeared to have been cracked, and all around the crack were tiny droplets of blood-like stains. After examining other areas of the home, they found even more suspected blood on some of the cabinets in Rebekah's kitchen and on one of the doorknobs on the back door. This was not good. It was apparent that this was a crime scene, and now, real yellow crime scene tape was added to the fake Halloween version that was already up outside Rebekah's trailer. The whole scene was just eerie, with it being Halloween while children were happily walking by, hoping to fill their buckets with candy. Rebekah's family's hearts were filled with dread, and poor Conway's night was ruined. Halloween would forever be marked with evil and heartbreak for this poor family. When investigators asked Sally if she knew anyone who would want to cause harm to her daughter, she said no. She had never heard one person say anything bad about Rebekah. All she could assume was that someone had taken her. Maybe someone was out doing no good on Devil's Night and saw Rebekah and snatched her up. Sally was so scared, she wondered if her daughter had been held captive. All she could do was wait and pray that they would find her and bring her home safely. Sally and John were calling around to people, asking if they'd seen Rebekah. John also called Donna Huden, an elder at the church, and asked her to please start a prayer chain to ask for prayers for Rebekah to be found. They were beside themselves and rallied the entire town to search for her. Imagine searching for a missing and now endangered person on Halloween night when people are covered in fake blood and disguises. The night took on a whole new meaning and feeling for this family. The costumes no longer looked fun. No one was interested in whose gory outfit looked the most realistic when real blood was found inside a loved one's home. Though it wasn't a lot of blood, detectives knew that time was running out. They had to find a lead fast if they wanted to find Rebekah alive. Next, they examined Rebekah's car. The inside looked fairly normal, just the usual mess of a busy mom with a 3-year-old. But one thing they noticed right away was that Rebekah's driver's seat was pushed way back, further than it should have been for a petite person like her. That was yet another clue that someone had moved her vehicle to this location, most likely to throw off investigators and make it look like she went into the bar and was taken from there. But we know that's not what happened. Someone came into Rebekah's home and attacked her, but where was she now, and who had done this? Investigators were informed that Rebekah had a boyfriend named Aaron Quinn, so they brought him in for questioning. Aaron was very upset, visibly shaken. He said that he had talked to Rebekah a couple of times the night before, just like he told his sister, but he added more detail. He said he texted Rebekah at 10:43 p.m. saying, "Good night, sweet dreams." She didn't answer, but he figured she was already asleep. However, what he found odd was that the next morning on Halloween, he texted her before her shift at 6:33 a.m. saying, "Good morning, Becca. Happy Halloween." But his text turned green, which he thought was really weird. Now, they both had iPhones, and if you don't know, the texts you send someone are usually blue from your end. When they turn green, it could mean that the person's phone is off, they're out of the service network, or they don't have a Wi-Fi connection. This was odd enough that it made Aaron take a mental note of it, but nothing more until now. Now it seemed connected to her disappearance, which meant by 6:33 a.m., something had seemingly gone wrong. Aaron answered all the investigators' questions with proof of where he had been the night before and that morning. His whereabouts were confirmed, plus the detective's perspective was that Aaron seemed genuinely worried about his girlfriend, the love of his life. He was bent out of shape about it. As a matter of fact, he confided in the detectives that he had been planning to propose to Rebekah for weeks. He had saved money for a ring since last Christmas and had it ready. He was actually waiting for the perfect moment, which he thought would be Halloween night, her favorite holiday. Aaron even planned for his family to be there, and he couldn't believe that Rebekah had disappeared. You could tell how in love he was with her. But could she have known about the proposal and gotten cold feet? Maybe she wanted a way to avoid a messy confrontation. Perhaps she took solace at a friend's house until she figured out how to turn Aaron down. As plausible as that was, everyone who was questioned said that the couple was very much in love. No friends of hers were harboring Rebekah at their place, and Aaron was adamant that he had nothing to do with her going missing. Rebekah loved and wanted to marry Aaron. They talked about their future together and starting a family of their own. So no one close to her could imagine her running away to avoid the things she actually dreamed about, especially leaving Conway behind, even for a few hours. However, while delving deeper into her personal relationships, detectives learned that Rebekah had another significant man in her life, her ex, Chad Sandel, the father of her son, Conway. With everyone saying how much Rebekah loved Aaron, investigators wondered if Chad took issue with that. If she had moved on with Aaron, maybe Chad wasn't fond of the idea. Perhaps he didn't want this guy around his son. These separations can be very messy, so he had to be questioned next. When they spoke with Chad, he told investigators he had no issues with Rebekah. Even though they didn't work out, they respected one another and got along. He claimed he had no clue where she was. However, Chad's demeanor did seem a little odd. He got angry with the authorities because, in his perspective, they were wasting time talking to him. He thought his time was better spent searching for the mother of his child. They understood where he was coming from, but they also let Chad know that the information he could provide might help them. So they went back to square one and began asking Chad about how he met Rebekah, what their relationship was like, and what their current routine was like with Conway. Chad explained their custody agreement and said that this Wednesday was like no other. On certain days when Rebekah had to work, John or Sally would make the exchange of their son. And that's what happened. John brought Conway to the Myers parking lot safely, and Rebekah never showed up to pick him up later that day. That was all he knew. Everything seemed so normal, but now he was trying to look for any clues that seemed out of place. Looking back now that Rebekah had disappeared, the only thing that stood out to him was that Conway was wearing his Halloween costume that morning, even though he wasn't set to go trick-or-treating until after his mother got off work that evening. But I'm sure you know how kids are. They don't always understand timelines. Chad just figured Conway couldn't wait to wear his Spider-Man costume. To gain a better understanding of that morning, and to put all these details together, they asked Pastor John White, Rebekah's mom's boyfriend, to come back to the station for a more in-depth information-gathering session. However, John was immediately given a hard time. After all, he was the last person to have seen Rebekah that day, so investigators seemed laser-focused on his answers, which could make anyone feel anxious. I mean, I forgot what I ate for breakfast today, and with routines being so habitual, it's easy to forget small details when you don't know in the moment that they're going to become important later on. Investigators wanted to know so many things. They wanted to know exactly what Rebekah was wearing. Had she put on normal everyday clothes or a costume for Halloween at work? Did she seem okay? Was she acting any different? Did she say she was going straight to work, or did she mention stopping at the bar door even though they wouldn't have been open yet? Was Conway acting normal? Why was he wearing his costume? The list went on and on. So of course, John felt bombarded with all these rapid-fire questions, but he tried his best to answer them. Starting with a very important clarification, it was early. John didn't usually come over that early to watch Conway. This was a new part of Rebekah's routine. She was starting her early day shifts at Goodwill, so John was tired when he first got there around 6:30 that morning. He was 55 years old, not a spring chicken, so details were not 100% sharp. But detectives were really hoping the minister could shed some light on anything that could help them locate Rebekah. So he gave them a play-by-play of Halloween morning. Rebekah's trailer was just a couple of rows down from his and Sally's. He walked over and saw that the porch lights were already on, which Rebekah would do in the morning, so he knew she was awake and expecting him. He also said he could tell she was in her bathroom because he could see someone inside moving around. He walked up to the front door. He didn't knock since the door was unlocked, so he let himself in. Once inside, he alerted Rebekah by saying, "Hey, I'm here." Rebekah answered him from inside the bathroom while getting ready. John recalled her saying something like, "Relax on the couch until Conway gets up," and she mentioned something about an Afghan. "If you don't know what that is, I wouldn't have either, unless I grew up with my grandmother. It's basically a crocheted blanket." This was actually the first time that John revealed he did not physically see Rebekah that morning. He only heard her and saw her silhouette through the bathroom window when he was outside. Now, this kind of changed things. Was he sure that he heard Rebekah's voice? Did she sound strained? Did it appear that she was being held against her will? Was there someone else in the house? John said that he couldn't be sure, but he thought he recalled Rebekah saying goodbye to him when she left, and maybe something about turning the heat down when he leaves. It was just hard to recall because he'd been over there so many times in the past 3 years watching Conway. It all kind of blurred together. Plus, he was drifting in and out of sleep on her couch. It was around 8 when little Conway woke him up, excited because it was Halloween. John said he saw the Spider-Man costume laying out in the bedroom, so he dressed Conway in his costume. Around 8:30, they left, and he brought Conway to meet with Chad at the Myers store. That's pretty much everything the investigators already knew, except the details about John not actually seeing Rebekah, only hearing her. Could it have been someone disguising their voice or forcing Rebekah to speak at gunpoint? We know her texts were already read by 6:30 that morning, so was she really getting ready that morning, or had someone harmed her and slipped her out of the house right under John's nose? They adored Pastor White. He was truly a godsend. They had been without a pastor for a while before John came along. T was perfect. Sally was a member and a Sunday school teacher, and one of her sons was the locksmith who came to change their locks one day and saw the ad for a pastor. He told John, who had gotten his minister's license years before, and he agreed to come see if he was a good fit. Donna Juan, an elder at Christ Community Fellowship who had a role in hiring John 3 years ago, told detectives she could assure them he was a man of God and had nothing to do with Rebekah's disappearance. He was a good pastor. The congregation respected him, and they had been without a pastor for almost a year. When John came to visit, they said it was surely God at work. John was a helpful neighbor and friend. He'd even gone over to Donna's to clean her gutters. He was mild-mannered and easy to like. One of the church members, Kelvin Patterson, had 6 children and lived with his wife, Michelle, right next door to Sally and John. They told investigators that John was a really close friend of theirs. He watched their children when they needed an extra hand, and even helped them build their deck in their backyard. He had been in their lives, as well as Rebekah's and Sally's, for over 6 years now. Everyone had complete trust in him, so they were actually upset when the investigators were giving him such a hard time. But they explained this was merely protocol. They had to rule everyone out. And remember, rumors fly. Investigators weren't just hearing positive things about John, so they had to do their due diligence. First of all, the bar staff, including the 2 women John had spoken to that afternoon, Janet and Kathy, gave their perspective. Apparently, the minister also liked to enjoy an adult beverage here and there, which is usually frowned upon in the Christian faith. But lately, they said he had been coming in more frequently. Plus, he came busting through the doors that morning asking about Rebekah. Janet turned to Kathy and told her, "You have to handle it," because she did not like him. Kathy said she tried her best to de-escalate the entire situation, but John was acting so distraught that it made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. There were scratches that she noticed on John's nose and on his hands, and the whole thing seemed kind of odd. They already had a bad vibe from him, and now this made him look suspicious. A drunken minister? I guess that could look bad on his part, but it doesn't mean that he's responsible for causing Rebekah harm. However, the scratch did raise another red flag, so investigators continued asking around, now with more pointed questions, asking people if John ever gave them any reason to think negatively about him. That is when the neighbor, Kelvin, also brought up the drinking. He said he didn't like how John drank and how he cussed, and then he was also supposed to be leading their congregation. But not only that, when asked if he noticed anything off between John and Rebekah, Cal remembered something. He wasn't sure it was that big of a deal, but he figured it was worth mentioning, considering the circumstances. Kelvin noticed that John treated Rebekah differently than other people, and he didn't treat her like a daughter because she wasn't his daughter. He said one night John was talking to him and he was like, "Isn't Rebekah such a beautiful woman? Wouldn't you like to have that?" Kelvin was like, "John, for God's sake, that is your girlfriend's daughter. What do you mean? Have that?" Yikes. That definitely seems like a red flag. 3. Kelvin wasn't the only one who noticed weird comments like that. Rebekah's colleagues told the investigators they needed to look into John because of the comments that he would make about Rebekah's looks. She actually told some of her coworkers that she started becoming a little uncomfortable around John. Then, one of the other mobile home park residents, Matt Brown, said that John would regularly cut through his yard to go to Rebekah's. The last time he saw him, he noticed scratches on his face that looked fresh. Detective Patterson had already seen the scratches when he first came to the scene, and he questioned John right away about them. They were on the side of his nose, as I'm showing it in the picture if you're watching, and some on his hands, but none of them were very large. However, the timing did seem kind of suspicious. John let him know that he did a lot of work as a handyman around the town and at his own house. He'd actually been working on his trailer the day before, and a shelf fell on him and scratched his nose. He even brought Patterson over there to show him exactly what happened and which shelf, and it did seem to add up. The scratches certainly could have been caused by everyday manual labor, but they could also be from a struggle, one where maybe someone was scratching him with their nails, someone like Rebekah. So investigators felt they needed to keep their focus on him until they had another lead. At this point, Patterson let John know that this is all just customary, that when someone goes missing, you check the person who saw them last, and that he needs to be eliminated like everyone else close to Rebekah, one by one. It would be very helpful if John sat for a polygraph. That way, once he passed, they could easily rule him out, and then they could move on and stop bothering him. Well, John was hesitant. I think a lot of people would be, considering these are not exact sciences, they're not accurate, so much so the reports are not admissible in court. But Sally convinced John, "Listen, you have nothing to hide. I know it's nerve-wracking, but just get it over with." So John agreed. He jumped into the passenger side of Patterson's police cruiser, and they went on an hour-long drive to Lansing, Michigan, where they had the equipment to carry out the test. While law enforcement worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, the community was not idle. In this small town where everyone knew and loved each other, people were desperate to help. Volunteers organized search parties to comb the area around Rebekah's home, hoping to find any clue that could lead to her whereabouts. Social media was lighting up with pleas for information and flyers with Rebekah's photo. They were plastered everywhere, on telephone poles, shop windows, and community boards. The tension grew as every hour went by without any concrete leads. Meanwhile, on the drive to Lansing for that polygraph, Detective Patterson tried to establish rapport with John. He wasn't under arrest or even a suspect, but that's what you do as a detective. They had small talk about his family, his upbringing, being in the military, and he told Patterson about his life and what led him to becoming a pastor. John White opened up to Detective Patterson about why he was so hesitant to take the polygraph test in the first place. He explained that when he was a lot younger, he wasn't the man he is today. He made mistakes, and some of those led him to having a criminal record. Even though it had been a long time, he made sure to pay his dues and completely turn his life around, turning from the ways that led him to the Lord. It's what made him want to change for the better, what he went through in his past. But Detective Patterson wasn't expecting John's past to include prison. However, John explained that it's something he makes known right away whenever he meets anyone. It's something he doesn't hide. He says it's true. A long time ago, he was involved in a very sad case where a woman he was friends with died, and he was there when it happened. She overdosed, and eventually he had to do 2 years in prison. But the case was ultimately thrown out, and he got released. He even mentioned that to the church. The church knows about it, Sally knows about it, everyone is aware. Neighbors had already mentioned this to the detectives, but Patterson was still alarmed. Something about it seemed odd. He wanted to understand more. And I mean, wouldn't you? I hope you do, because I'm going to tell you more about John and his past. Since they thoroughly had to look into him after divulging that information, it kind of sent shockwaves through the police department. An ex-convict turned pastor, John was known as a success story, as someone the Lord had healed, and now he used his past as a lesson. Investigators were reaching out to John's family and friends so they could provide more insight into who he was and the struggles he had that led him to the Lord. So, let's go back in time to May 20th of 1957, the day that John was born to his parents, Juanita and John White Sr. John had an older sister, Lilette, who was 8 years older than him, and a younger sister, Christina, who was about 4 years younger than him. They were very close, practically inseparable. Their father, John Sr., was a police chief, a fire chief, and the mayor of Augusta, Michigan, the city that they lived in, a small town. Their father was very involved in his community, and everyone knew who they were. So, when John Jr., the John we're talking about, would get into trouble, his dad was bound to find out. He was usually on his best behavior. He had a really normal, healthy childhood and spent a lot of time with his family, especially playing with his sister Christina. John and Christina were very close, as I said, and she looked up to her brother, wanting to do everything he was doing. Whether it was playing basketball, playing kickball, or hide and seek, they did everything together and had a great childhood. I'm saying this because when investigators are looking into someone's past, they're looking for red flags. What kind of childhood do they have? Did they grow up with alcoholics? Were they abused? What is going on in their life? Well, they found out that his childhood was like many others. The children had rooms across from one another, and Christina and John used to wait till their parents went to bed. They would stay up and then play together, and one of their favorite things to do was to throw stuffed animals back and forth to one another. They would laugh and laugh, hoping their parents wouldn't catch them. But as John got older, his mouth would get him into trouble. He had a habit of talking back and also playing a lot of pranks, if that's what you want to call them. But as John got older, his mouth would get him into trouble. He had a habit of talking back and also playing a lot of pranks, if that's what you want to call them. For example, when he was in high school, he and a guy friend of his would go to the girls' locker room, and they would open the door just a crack and yell something crude, something that they thought was funny, like, "I need a maxi pad," hoping that the girls would get a good laugh out of it because they thought it was so funny. However, when John would come home and tell his sister Chrissy about what he had done, she would laugh, but then she would also shake her head and warn him that he was going to get in trouble for doing things like that. John would simply shrug it off, telling her they were just having some fun. And it does sound like a typical teenage boy, but over time, it seemed like John was always making excuses, especially when he was confronted about something he did wrong. John's dad did not tolerate lying. If John or his siblings lied to him and he found out, he would take them into his room, shut the door, and then ask them to tell him the truth. If they didn't, he would spank them until they did. Now, Chrissy obeyed because she didn't want a spanking, but when she would hear John getting a spanking, she would actually cry. She wouldn't see her brother John cry, but it was like it hurt her worse just by watching or listening to it than it hurt John getting the spanking. Besides, John was never that emotional about things like that. He was more logical, which played a part in his storytelling. That's right, John had stories all the time. You can call them stories, or you can call them excuses, as I mentioned before, but it seemed like he never took responsibility for anything. If he didn't do his homework or got a bad grade, it was never his fault. Instead, he would tell you a story about why it happened, and it always seemed plausible. But then again, what young kids don't tell tales sometimes, right? That's why Chrissy was always assuming it was something her brother would grow out of. After high school, he decided to go into the Navy. He left for Japan for a couple of years, and when he got back, he would tell these amusing stories about all the crazy experiences he had. A lot of times, no one knew whether John's stories were real or not. John liked to embellish. That's part of what made him a great storyteller. He was very entertaining to his friends, and they loved listening to him. But there was one story that stuck out to his sister, Chrissy. A story where John admitted to hurting someone. He explained that one night, he met a woman at a bar, and they were flirting. They went back to his hotel room to hook up, and John went to the bathroom. When he came back, he went to the bed and realized that the person he brought home was actually a man. John told his friends that it completely freaked him out. He wasn't expecting that. So what did he do? He beat the hell out of the guy. All of his guy friends thought this was hilarious. Chrissy, not so much. She didn't know if the story was even real. There were a lot of bad jokes with the very same punchline, making it really hard to tell. She was so used to not knowing what to believe. But this was the first time she had ever heard her brother say that he'd become violent with someone. Because she knew he was in a foreign place, in the military going through training and all that, she figured it could have affected him so much mentally. Maybe he acted out because of stress or feeling fooled. She wasn't sure. But she also didn't give it much weight since it was just a story. When John got back from the Navy, he got together with one of Chrissy's friends from high school named Dawn, who went by Vaughn since her middle name was Ivan. The pair hit it off and ended up getting married. They settled in Battle Creek, Michigan, at 146 College Street, and everything seemed to be going well. John appeared to be a good husband, and they were planning to start a family soon. That's why what happened next was such a shock to John's sister. On March 19, 1980, Chrissy was sitting in her apartment when the news came on the TV. That was normal until she heard her brother's name. The reporter said that 22-year-old Battle Creek resident John Douglas White had been arrested for stabbing a 17-year-old neighbor of his. But what was even more unexpected was that the victim was a female. Chrissy couldn't believe this. How could that have happened, and why? Of course, she immediately dialed John's wife. She was told that John and their neighbor, Teresa, were down in the basement smoking pot. Apparently, the young girl turned on him. She came at him with a knife because she wanted the rest of his stash. Dawn said she was upstairs when all of a sudden John came running up the stairs, screaming that he thought he just killed the poor girl and to call the police. John was injured too. He had a bunch of cuts on his hands and his thumbs. They were both rushed to the hospital, and the young woman had to go into emergency surgery, but she survived the whole ordeal. Chrissy rushed to be by her brother's side. She saw his wounds and asked him what happened. He explained what Dawn had already said. This crazy druggy teenager came at him with a damn knife. Chrissy could tell from the cuts on her brother's hands that must have been what happened. He was stopping this woman from stabbing him. He said he was in so much shock he blacked out, and when he came to, there was a girl just lying there on the floor, bleeding. He clearly defended himself. John was never the type to start things, but it was just so shocking to think that this girl attacked him out of nowhere in his own home. Chrissy knew John. He was always very protective of her. They were family, and she knew he would never intentionally hurt anyone. Or would he? This ordeal made her think back to a time when they were growing up. It was the first time Chrissy had noticed her brother might be a little bit different and have another side of him. One time, she threw a stuffed animal into his room like she always did late at night. But instead of throwing one back, as she expected, John didn't throw anything. So being playful and wanting to get his attention, she threw something else. Except John walked right into her room and said, "If you throw anything again, I'm gonna kill you." Chrissy was shocked. It didn't even sound like John, and it scared her a bit. I mean, there are a lot of older brothers and sisters who say very mean things to their siblings, things that they don't mean in the moment. That's what Chrissy imagined it was, but she did have a feeling inside that made her question things. However, being a kid, she let it go and went to bed afterward. John just turned around and went right back to his room, and they never mentioned it again. Chrissy figured, you know what, he was in a bad mood. Maybe it was hormones. There were just so many things that could have caused that, and she loved her brother, so she never wanted to see him in a bad light. However, she never threw anything back into his room after that night, so she thought, could he be capable of hurting someone on purpose? Was there a real threat that he would have killed her, or was he just being a rude big brother to an annoying little sister? Well, then Chrissy remembered something else. When they were a little bit older, they both had a newspaper delivery route. Chrissy was on her route one day and came to this house where the family had this big, beautiful dog. It was really big, and when she got up to the porch, the dog ran out and jumped on top of her. Unfortunately, the weight pulled her down to the floor, and of course, the family that lived there ran outside to quickly help her get up and get the pet off of her. But she was so scared, she cried all the way home, where her mom and dad tried to comfort her. After she calmed down, Chrissy realized that she had suffered some bite marks, but the attack hadn't drawn any blood. It was just really traumatizing for a very young girl. John just stood by her side as she explained everything that happened, but he never said anything. He didn't even seem upset about the situation. However, when Chrissy went on her paper route the very next day, the dog was gone. That was a little surprising to her, but her first thought wasn't what she was told happened. Maybe she assumed they gave it away or put it in a behavioral training class or something like that. No. When she got back to school, her friends told her that the family was heartbroken when they found their dog dead, not from natural causes. They had been looking for it and discovered that it had been shot out in the woods behind their home. At the time, Chrissy felt so bad, but she knew so many people in Augusta were hunters. They all had guns. Since the dog showed aggression, maybe someone took matters into their own hands. But what she never suspected was that it could be her own brother, or maybe she didn't want to believe he was capable of something like that. John never mentioned anything, so she forgot all about it until much later in life. She had never experienced John being violent because he wasn't, or was he? Was there a part of him he was hiding? Chrissy began questioning a lot of things, especially when the girl that was stabbed claimed that John was the one who attacked her. Chrissy couldn't see any logic in that at all. It made no sense to her. John, in his own home with his wife upstairs, just stabs a 17-year-old girl out of nowhere. Chrissy did not believe that John had hurt Teresa intentionally. But the case actually went to trial a year later in 1981, and John had to serve 2 years in prison for his part in the attack. He apologized again and again and asked if there was any alternative to him doing prison time, but there wasn't. While he was serving his time, John decided to write a book about his life. Remember, he loved telling stories. Well, now he was writing one, and he sent a copy to his sister Chrissy. She was so excited reading it until something she read caught her off guard. It was the part where he talked about them having their paper routes. Then, John admitted to shooting the dog that attacked her. Chrissy was in total shock. She just wasn't expecting such a confession. But it was also how he explained what he did. He got down on his stomach with his shotgun in front of him, just waiting for the dog to come outside. And when it did, he didn't hesitate to pull the trigger and kill it for biting Chrissy and hurting her. That poor dog, she really hadn't put two and two together. He never mentioned it, not even once. never even hinted that he had done that. This was when Chrissy began to think that John's sense of right and wrong could be off somehow, and maybe she really didn't know her own brother. But she believed that he had done this because the dog hurt someone he loved, that it wasn't just unprovoked. It did seem like bad luck followed John around, though. Once John was out of prison in 1984, he worked as a long-haul trucker, which Chrissy thought was really cool, especially with all the things her brother told her he'd seen on his travels. She imagined how funny it would be to spend days cruising all around the United States and seeing so many different things. John was proud of his big truck. He wasn't alone either. He worked with a guy named Frederick Nickel. They spent hours riding together in the truck cab, and he knew about John's past. He knew that he had been in prison, but he also knew John as a gregarious, funny, easygoing guy who was never violent. They rode together all throughout the 80s into the early 90s, and there was only one time that John ever raised his voice. It was at a way station in Ohio. One of the many tires on John's semi-truck had gone flat, and a female Department of Transportation worker wouldn't let his truck pass unless he got out right then and changed it. Well, he was pissed. He started yelling and cursing, actually throwing out slurs at this poor lady. That kind of surprised Frederick, but it was only borderline aggressive, not physical, just verbal anger. However, what he did know was that John could be a pervert. Those were his words. A pervert. Maybe John was just trying to do a little bragging, but he would show Fred how to tap into their truck's CB radio and contact sex workers, which John referred to as prostitutes. That was the way they were labeled back in the 80s. He would show his friend all the CB stops where women were willing to trade their services for cash. All the stories he would share with Fred about being in the Navy had to do with ports of call and women of the night with whom he had encounters. But all that changed when John got married. By June of 1986, he and Dawn had their first child, a son they named Benjamin. At this point, they relocated to a new part of Michigan called Kalamazoo. John was still working his trucking route, but slowing down a bit since he was now a father. Over the next few years, things were going well, and in January of 1994, the couple welcomed their second son, Gabriel. By this point, John had stopped truck driving altogether. He was trying to find a more stable job and lifestyle that would keep him closer to home now that he had 2 children. So, he took a job at an industrial laundry company called Textile Systems Incorporated, where he worked maintenance on their machines that cleaned linens for hospitals and other big businesses. However, soon there was trouble in John's marriage. He and Dawn were arguing a lot, and John confided in his sister, Chrissy, that he had met a woman at work named Vicki Wall, and he thought he might be in love with her. Chrissy didn't want to hear it, but John proceeded to confess to his sister that he and his 26-year-old co-worker, he was 37, were having an affair. He explained how they were meeting up in secret in the back parking lot of one of the Myers stores and having sex in his pickup truck. Chrissy urged her brother to be honest with his wife, insisting it wasn't fair to her or their children for him to be doing that. But John said he didn't want to tell his wife. Months went by, and then in July of that same year, 1994, Chrissy got a call from John's wife at around 3 a.m. She was frantic and told Chrissy that John had left and was threatening to take his own life. He was a wreck, and Chrissy was completely freaking out. She got in her car and started looking everywhere for her brother all over town, but she couldn't find him. Later, Chrissy would read a report that a 26-year-old Kalamazoo woman, Vicki Wall, had recently gone missing. She recognized the name right away. It was the woman her brother was seeing. No wonder he was beside himself. But what was going on? Where was she? Had John's wife found out about their affair, causing Vicki to run away, or was there something worse going on? Did her brother have anything to do with it? Of course the police thought so. Vicki had not been seen or heard from since July 10th and was finally reported missing 5 days later on July 15th. Her car was later found abandoned in a Myers parking lot off G Road. The news was putting out information about her, including that she was a white female, age 26, with reddish-brown hair and blue eyes, standing 5 feet 3 inches and weighing about 130 pounds. When investigators went to that parking lot, they pulled up CCTV footage, which showed a black pickup truck that looked just like John's entering the same Myers parking lot and pulling up right next to Vicki's car at 3 a.m. on July 11th. Chrissy got out, got into the truck, and there was a bearded man in the driver's seat. They were seen driving away together. That bearded man was John. It was clear, there was no mistaking it. He had a very distinctive look back then, with shaggy dark hair and a full beard. The thing is, this footage never showed John coming back to where Vicki's car was parked and dropping her back off, so they needed to question him about being the last person to have contact with Vicki. Now remember, all this information was being gathered by the investigators on Rebekah's case. They were finally wondering if this was the woman who overdosed in John's presence. Remember that he openly admitted to everyone that he had been involved in the death of a woman, which had caused him to serve time in prison. We already know about the stabbing when he was 22, but that did not involve anyone dying, so they thought this had to be it. So they kept digging. They pulled up a police report from the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Department. Eric Dunathan was the deputy who first questioned John at the time that Vicki disappeared. The deputy remembered John from back in Augusta. Remember, John's father was a cop, the chief of police, and the chief of the fire department. So many people knew his family. And of course, because of John's misfortune with that stabbing back in Battle Creek, law enforcement was well aware of who he was. John denied knowing anything about what happened to Vicki. He said he hadn't seen her. When confronted with the surveillance video, that's when his story changed. He admitted to picking Vicki up that night and hanging out like they usually did, but John insisted that she was very much alive when he left her. However, there was no video of him leaving her, so it didn't make much sense. Still, there wasn't any evidence to suggest foul play was involved, so John was free to go for the time being. Within days of detectives speaking with him, though, John became distraught. He was depressed and having thoughts of taking his own life, seemingly over his mistress's vanishing. His friends, including Fred, were really worried about him. Finally, he confided in his own wife, telling her about having an affair with Vicki, not divulging everything, but expressing his worry about her being gone and him possibly being blamed for it because he was the last one with her. That's when he claimed that they had been doing drugs and that Vicki suddenly became unresponsive in the passenger seat of his truck. He panicked, not wanting to get in trouble, especially because of his past and because he was also under the influence. In his panic, he claimed he blacked out and couldn't remember the details, but he said he must have dumped her body somewhere. This was shocking, but the blackouts were not a new claim. He had told his wife about his blackouts and even mentioned them to Deputy Dunathan. When he was first interviewed, John mentioned that it was possible he could have done something to Vicki if he had blacked out. After this, he told his wife he was going to take his own life because he didn't want anyone to suffer through yet another trial because of him. He expressed the same sentiment to Fred, adding that in just a week or so, his wife would have letters written by him explaining everything before he took his life, which she would pass out to everyone afterward. The next night, Fred saw John riding his bike down the street, and John apparently told him that he was on his way to take his own life. Later, Fred went to John's house to check on his family, and his wife asked if John had already done it, referring to whether he was already dead. That's when she explained to Fred that John had multiple personal IDs and how, when he was doing things, he felt like he was watching from somewhere else and that someone else was doing them. She suspected that he was probably responsible for actually killing Vicki and that it wasn't an accident, but due to his blackouts. We know that John never took his life. He did attempt to drown his sorrow in pills and booze. Meanwhile, detectives were gathering probable cause to make an arrest. They eventually obtained a search warrant in Vicki's case for John's house and truck. They didn't find any blood in the house, but when they sprayed his truck with luminol, it glowed in a couple of spots. The issue was that DNA testing was very new at the time. They needed a significant amount of blood to get a solid result, and it had to be fresh, not dried. They used to need 500 nanograms, but now they only need half a nanogram, and it can be old as well. However, they still didn't have a body. They were looking for Vicki Wall alive and couldn't arrest John at this point because they didn't have enough evidence. It was evident there had been a cleanup in the back of that truck. At this time, John had checked himself into the Alazo Regional Psychiatric Hospital, and the search for Vicki was ongoing. Her family was desperate for answers. Then, about 6 weeks after her disappearance, in late August, Kalamazoo County resident Thomas McKill was walking down a dirt road near his parents' land at the 7400 block of East H Avenue. This area was only 2 miles from the Myers store, where Vicki was last seen getting into John's pickup truck. As Thomas walked down this familiar road, he noticed something strange on the ground. There were drag marks in the dirt. Following the direction of the marks, he spotted a white tennis shoe. He ventured further into the brush on the side of the road and saw a path where it looked like someone had trampled over branches and brush, flattening the grass. As he walked that trail, he saw a pair of women's underwear on the ground, and then he noticed an intense, putrid smell. He recognized it immediately as the smell of death. As he continued, he saw part of a human skull and immediately ran back home to call the police. When homicide investigators arrived on the scene, they found the unclothed body of a female. Her shirt and bra were pulled up around her neck, and the remains had been exposed to the elements for over a month. She was sadly heavily decomposed. During the autopsy, the pathologist could not determine a cause of death but listed the manner of death as homicide, given where she was found and her clothing situation. It was evident that it was probably a sexual crime, especially since John was the last person Vicki was with. Officers went to the psychiatric hospital in September 1994, a week after her body was recovered, and arrested John. He was charged with open murder. In every state, there are different classifications of murder, and open murder is a common way of stating there are multiple theories for a homicide. They didn't know how the person died, but they knew it wasn't natural. I know this is a lot to take in, and this case is about Rebekah, but I don't want anyone to forget that these other victims matter. And of course, all of this is related to John, a person very close to Rebekah and her family. While the detectives on her case were uncovering all of this, it only made them more suspicious of John. This was many years ago, and when John was arrested for Vicki's death, he refused to talk and wouldn't take a polygraph. Without enough solid evidence, prosecutors presented him with a plea deal, and he accepted it. He pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter of Vicki Wall. While he was waiting for sentencing, he wrote his wife a letter stating that he was feeling somewhat relieved now that things were starting up, adding that he was coming to grips with the possibility that he may go to prison for the rest of his life. He couldn't help but think maybe that was best for her and the kids. John's sister visited him in jail, mainly because she wanted to get his side of the story. Here is what John told his sister. He explained that Vicki was into rough intercourse, which involved erotic asphyxiation. In other words, she liked being choked. He told her that he picked Vicki up, and after they did some drugs together, they engaged in intimacy when she suddenly slumped over in the seat. When he tried to move her, there was no response, and he felt really scared, unsure of what to do. In his panic, he dumped her body in the woods. His sister's response was probably what ours would have been. Why didn't you call for help or drive her to the hospital? His answer? He was too scared. Well, imagine how scared Vicki must have been. Chrissy couldn't help but think, wow, here is yet another story, another excuse. She knew that people did not just fall over dead, but she loved her brother and wouldn't allow herself to believe he could be capable of hurting someone, so she took him at his word that this was a tragic accident. However, she was older now, and in the back of her mind, she began putting all the clues together, wondering if John had ever told her the truth about the situations he kept finding himself in. It seemed too unbelievable. He couldn't be that unlucky. At his sentencing in May of 1995, John made a statement expressing his love for Vicki and apologizing to her family, stating that this was a very tragic accident. He never provided any details, just that he loved her very much. If it was truly an accident and he loved this woman, why not get her medical assistance? John loved himself more than he could ever love another person, if he could even be capable of true love as we know it. Normal people, people who aren't as unlucky as John, don't act like this. Kalamazoo County Circuit Judge John F. Fye sentenced John White to a maximum of 8 to 15 years in prison, noting that his previous violent acts against women and this unexplained violent act indicated he was dangerous and had a dangerously low level of self-control. It was becoming clear there was a pattern, and John's sister was starting to see it too. She remembered stories John used to tell her about his days on the road as a long-haul trucker. He would talk about women he referred to as lot lizards, a degrading nickname for females he saw as having no worth except for his sexual pleasure. John told his sister these women would come up to talk to the truckers all the time, but he never touched them. He never hooked up with them. However, that's not what his friends told her. They claimed these women would come into his truck, and after spending some intimate time with him, he would dump them in a dumpster. John never said he actually killed any of these women, just that when he was done with them, he referenced throwing them into a dumpster. Chrissy had always assumed John's friends were just making up stories, but now, knowing what she knew, she wondered if her brother had actually killed these women, women who wouldn't be reported missing. Maybe that was why he liked being on the road. It was a scary and sickening thought, but at least he was behind bars. John was sentenced to 13 years without parole for Vicki's murder. I want to emphasize that we're still discussing Vicki. I don't want anyone to get confused. During his time in prison, John's wife divorced him. Over the years, he began to devote himself to studying the Bible and eventually repented, turning his life over to the Lord. While incarcerated, John also attended group therapy sessions, underwent violent offender treatment, and frequently met with mental health professionals. He even earned his minister's credentials while in prison, becoming a model prisoner and spending most of his time in the chapel. Sadly, his parents passed away while he was incarcerated, his father in 2002 and his mother in 2006, just a year before his release. In 2007, John Douglas White was a free man. The only person he had left was his sister, so he reached out to Chrissy and asked if she would take him in until he could get back on his feet. He told her how he had given himself to Christ and assured her that his past was behind him. Of course, it had been so long since they had both lost their parents. He was all the family Chrissy had left, and she wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. Being a compassionate person, she sensed that there was a positive change in her brother, so she allowed him to move in with her and her husband. John tried to find churches where he could minister, but due to his background, he had a hard time getting hired. He also engaged in online dating, looking to meet new people he could relate to and connect with. That is when he met Sally. When Chrissy met Sally, she thought she was a very nice woman with a good sense of humor. She was funny and easy to talk to. Sally told Chrissy that she adored John, loved him, and was very happy. This made Chrissy happy too, as she genuinely wanted John to have a somewhat normal life after everything he had been through. However, she couldn't help but wonder if Sally knew about John's past. First, she asked her brother to let Sally know about what happened in their past, and he told her, yeah, she does. But of course, Chrissy wanted to confirm with Sally herself. So when the ladies were alone for a moment, Chrissy asked Sally, saying, "Did he give you all the gory details?" Sally said yes. Kind of made me cringe the way that she said that. It was gory, it was horrific. And you haven't even heard details yet. Just wait. I'm not telling you all this for nothing. I promise details are going to matter. And John sure as hell hadn't revealed any details to anyone yet. Sally was the one who told John about the opening for a pastor's position at her church. And John went in for an interview with the elders, including Donna Huden, who I already told you about, and Catherine Cotter. He explained to them that he was involved with a woman who was using drugs. The poor woman died from an overdose, and he panicked and ran. Which, I kid you not, Donna said she theoretically thought could probably happen to most anyone. Really? No, it's a red flag. But to these women, they believed that John was being upfront about everything, that this talk they had with him was enough because they liked him. They liked his sermons. He seemed to be a nice guy. He was a perfect fit. The church took him in. They welcomed him with open arms. Catherine even added that they had no reason not to believe what John had told them, saying, "I mean, why would you tell someone you're in prison and make up a story?" "Well, Catherine, because you're a killer that wants to get in a position of power and authority so that he can easily gain the trust of women and then eventually have his way with them and then dump them like trash. Maybe that's why." But the elders said they thought it was surely God at work. John would repeatedly thank his small congregation for giving him a chance, but deep inside, John wasn't reformed. He may have believed he was, but he was a bad man who used religion so that people would feel at ease around him. And for 6 years, things actually did seem pretty normal in his life. John was happy. He told his sister how excited he was to be part of Sally's life and her family, how he loved taking on the role of a father figure to Rebekah, and how much he talked highly of little Conway. That's when John's sister got a phone call from him on Halloween, telling her that Rebekah was missing. Her thoughts went to hoping that Rebekah was just somewhere with a friend. But as time went on, and John informed her that she was still nowhere to be found and police were searching for her, it was like deja vu all over again. Chrissy knew that a mother wouldn't have just left her child behind like that. She began to have a gut feeling that something wasn't adding up. The common denominator in all of these unfortunate events in John's life was John. It made Chrissy jog her memory for any red flags when it came to John and Rebekah. She recalled a time that John called her really upset because Rebekah had promised to come over and have pizza and a movie night, something they had routinely done before Rebekah started dating Aaron. Well, one night, Rebekah backed out of their plans to spend time together with Conway and Aaron. That shouldn't be a big deal at all. She's an adult with a life of her own, and John's her mother's boyfriend, not hers. But the way he was going on and on about it to Chrissy, it was weird. It was like, I can't believe she did that after all that I've done for her. I've done so much for her. I can't believe she would just stand me up like that. And he would repeat himself over and over again. Chrissy thought he was being really ridiculous, to be this bent out of shape about a young woman not wanting to come over and hang out with senior citizens. But at the time, Chrissy didn't think much of it. But now, with Rebekah being missing, she suspected that John may not have had a father-daughter type relationship with Rebekah, at least not in his eyes. It's almost as though he was obsessing over her, and it didn't seem healthy. With all this new information, detectives on Rebekah's case wondered what really happened in Teresa and Vicki's cases. Something didn't seem right about the information that John provided to people. It was like it was rehearsed, like he had said it so many times. So they dug up the case files, and this is when things became intense. There had been a trial in Teresa's case, and according to her testimony, John had most definitely attacked her. His whole demeanor changed in an instant. She actually said that it was like he wasn't even there anymore. His eyes were black, and he began stabbing her over and over again. Well, they actually tracked down this woman. She's married, so now she's Teresa Morris. She's 49 years old. Wait until you hear this. This poor woman. She was only a girl back in 1980, just 17 years old, when 22-year-old John White moved into her neighborhood with his wife. Teresa said she was a normal teenager. She ran around with the kids from high school, spent time studying, and never had time to get into any trouble. Teresa was also very beautiful, something John noticed right away. Teresa wasn't friends with John. She had noticed him here and there, said hi to him when she walked around the street near his house, and John always seemed a little bit off to her. But they never really did anything more than just exchange those highs and byes. Until March 19th, she actually met up with him. On that day, by chance, she was looking for a friend of hers, and she asked John about them. Teresa was about to get on her way to continue looking for her friend when John said, "Hey, come look at my slot car racing track that I made in my basement." So he invited her inside his house, and to be polite, she followed him. She walked in first in front of him. They were all alone down in the basement when she got this cold feeling. She heard a voice in her head tell her she should leave. But before she could, John ran up from behind and stabbed her in the back under her right shoulder blade. She couldn't even grasp what was happening until she turned around to face him, and that's when she saw the knife. A second later, she was being stabbed in the stomach. She recalls watching him stab her, and the look on his face was one of pure pleasure. He was actually smiling back at her. Wow, that is absolutely terrifying. After this, she fell to the floor, and he was holding her down while he kept stabbing her over and over again. That's when he told her this wasn't his first time, and that she was making this much more difficult than it needed to be because she was pushing him. She was fighting back. She was trying to get away. She was scratching him, biting him, and screaming at the top of her lungs for him to stop, pleading with him and yelling for help. John told her to shut up. Then he told her that she was going to be a nice piece of meat. She actually had the moment to ask him what he was talking about, and while she was trying to get out of his grasp, that's when he began calling her his wife's name and telling her, "If I can't have you, I'm sure as hell not going to let anyone else have you." Then he stood over her and asked her why she wasn't dead yet. It was confusing and terrifying for this young girl. He kept going, and each time Teresa could feel all 6 inches of the blade, it was like it was in slow motion. She was like, wow, this is what it feels like to be stabbed. She was getting weaker and thought, I'll just go to sleep, then maybe he will leave me alone. So she played dead. He laid her out on the floor, and there was so much blood, it was all over her and the ground. He thought she was dead or nearly dead at this point, and that's when he wiped the blood off of her mouth and started kissing her. Then he held her hand and said, "You're gonna go now. I'm really sorry you had to go like this, but you're just a woman." Oh my God, this monster. It's disgusting to hear these words coming straight from someone who survived such evil. That's when he brought up the knife again, and she knew he was going to cut her neck, so she hung her head down and prayed that it would be quick. But it went across her chin instead. He picked her up, put her in his lap like a child, and rocked her back and forth saying, "Just go to sleep." And that's when, allegedly, his wife walked into the basement. Minutes later, she was standing over Teresa with a sheet, and both she and John placed it over Teresa's face. What? In those last moments before police got there due to the neighbor hearing Teresa's screams, she was begging Dawn to help her, but according to Teresa, she did nothing. She walked away. Teresa was rushed to the hospital in the ICU. She underwent emergency surgery to save her life. She was stabbed 15 times and was very lucky to be alive. John's father immediately hired him a defense attorney, James Tobert, and the case went to trial. A jury convicted John of attempted murder, and his sentence was 10 years in prison. The judge also recommended mental health counseling. Teresa was promised that John was never going to be able to hurt anyone again. That was the last she heard about the case, and she moved on in her life, trying to forget what happened to her, although I'm sure she relived that moment in her mind every day. What Teresa was never informed about was John's appeal, an appeal that he won. His claim? Ineffective counsel. He argued that his attorney had made the mistake of not raising an insanity defense for him. He claimed he had been suffering from partial amnesia. I know it's unbelievable, but the State Court of Appeals reversed the jury verdict and remanded the case. The appellate judge's opinion was that the defense counsel was more concerned with the desires of John's father, who had retained him, than the best interests of his client John. Because, as it turned out, John's dad didn't want to pay the $10,000 or more for an independent psychiatric exam for John that was needed to claim insanity. Instead of a new trial, John was actually given a deal, 2 years probation. I'm not talking about jail time and then probation, I'm talking about no jail time. He was being released after just 2 years. How well? Poor Teresa. She didn't even know that he was free. So can you imagine her surprise and her utter shock when, 4 years after this incident took place and she was almost killed by this man, she's sitting at the Secretary of State's office? She's in line and literally hears his voice behind her, the distinctive voice she could never forget. She turns around and he's standing there. She said that she had been hearing that voice in her head almost every day since she was stabbed, and there he was, the monster, just smiling back at her like nothing ever happened. She instinctively goes into defense mode and picks up one of those posts that makes the dividing line at a bank, and she went over to him and almost started beating him with this. Of course, the security guard comes over. He tells her to run, which she did. This was just a few years before the state's Victim Rights Act, which requires courts now to include victims in every step of the legal process. You have to be notified if a defendant is released from prison. John had told the judge in this case that it was by the grace of God, or whatever his words, that the victim in this case was still alive. He was talking about Teresa, so he meant to kill this poor girl. I want to finally go back to the current case, the investigation that was going on Halloween evening in 2012. 12 hours had gone by since Rebekah had failed to show up at work. The investigators were desperate to find this young mother. They didn't know whether she was still alive or not, and they were hoping that John would give them answers. Remember where we left off? John was riding with Detective Patterson to Lansing, Michigan for a polygraph test, and during this car ride, Patterson was building rapport with John. They finally get John in a seat for the polygraph. If a person passes, they'll usually just move on to other leads. But if they fail, they take it as a sign that they need to do a more thorough interrogation of that person. So when John is asked whether he knows anything about Rebekah's disappearance, he says no and tells them the same story he's already told. But the machine picks up that he's being deceitful. Patterson leaves the room, corresponds with Detective Green and other officers who had been gathering all the information that I just told you. So Patterson now knows everything he knows. He knows he has to do an intense interrogation of John. Meanwhile, the officers are still canvassing the mobile home park, and soon enough, a trooper calls Patterson with some crucial information. When he shined his flashlight into the back of John's pickup truck, he saw what appeared to be blood and a necklace. When he examined the necklace up close, it was apparent that it was still clasped together but broken in the middle, as though it had been ripped off someone's neck in a struggle. This is huge, but it's also very sad because even more blood has been found, and investigators are now fearing the worst, that Rebekah Gay is dead. So Detective Patterson requests search warrants for John's trailer and his pickup truck, and to take pictures of what's inside the bed of that truck and send them over to him because he wanted to confront John with the evidence as leverage. They were sure that he had something to do with this and were hoping to get a confession. While Detective Patterson is listening to John ramble on about his past, all the excuses for his misfortune, officers are searching his trailer, where he lives with Sally and his pickup. Inside the trailer, they found a rubber mallet inside of a plastic bag. They found zip ties and contractor-sized garbage bags, like industrial-sized, bigger than the normal kitchen-style bags. These were 55-gallon black garbage bags. Wow, that is incriminating. I mean, he did say, "I do a lot of handiwork," but this type of handiwork is at the hands of a killer. It's becoming clearer with every new piece of evidence. But wait until you hear what they find next. Underwear, Victoria's Secret, extra small size that matched Rebekah's size. And of course, they weren't her mother's. He was hoarding these pairs of underwear. God only knows what else he was doing with them. This looked like a picture of a pair in his freezer. Just look, if you're watching, isn't that frozen food underneath? That is so bizarre to me. But wait a minute. Actually, that looks like that's his trash. I'm sorry, that is his trash. He's trying to get rid of them with bags of old food in his own trash bin. Wow, so dumb. But you know what? I'm glad when a criminal doesn't think, because that's how they get caught. At this point, Patterson gets those pictures of the blood and the necklace in the back of John's blue pickup truck that was parked outside his trailer, and he shows this picture to John. John's acting so confused, saying he doesn't know what it is, that it looks like blood. I like Patterson because he is no nonsense. He's like, that's exactly what it is. Patterson's expertise led him to a strategic move. He could tell for what it was worth that John seemed to at least be indebted to Sally, because love is a very strong word, but that's what Patterson used. He said he thought that John was in love with Sally. And by all accounts, from what you could tell by the way John spoke of how she changed his life for the better, helped him get his pastor gig, took him in his family, he loved her. So Patterson decides to use Sally as a way to get John to break. He begins to say, "Listen, John, you love Sally. The best thing for Sally is to give her answers. We don't want Sally to be wondering where her daughter is and that her body was most likely going to deteriorate in the cold, wet weather." Did he want that for Sally? At this point, it's obvious John knew he was caught, and that's when he clammed up. He said he was done talking, saying if they were going to arrest him, he wanted a lawyer, which is his right, of course. This interrogation had gone on for hours, nearly 12 hours. It was early the next morning, November 1st, now around 4 or 5 a.m., so Patterson asked John if he would like a bite to eat, since at this point he had to stop the interrogation. Since John asked for a lawyer, apparently he lost his appetite and declined any food. So Patterson used another tactic: isolation. Detectives will purposely leave the room and let a suspect stew by themselves. There's something about someone sitting with the weight of what they're facing that often makes them break, and it worked. After he sat there for quite a while Patterson was speaking with the DA's office, he came back and John immediately said he wanted to make a deal. He knew they had him, so he asked for one last phone call, which was to Sally. Life in prison and to be in solitary confinement, segregated from other inmates. I'm guessing this was to avoid the death penalty and being killed or harassed by inmates. But later I think it becomes even more clear why he requested these things. Patterson said, "The only way that I will make a deal with you is if you tell us where the body is." He cut to the chase because it was clear, especially from John's violent past, that Rebekah was most likely not alive. Not only did John agree in writing, but he also admitted something chilling about his past crimes, which he went into detail about as if he was just getting it off of his chest. Remember Vicki, the one he swore he loved, that it was just a tragic accident? That's not true. John had a fetish that he claimed started when he was just 11 years old. He said he had an imaginary friend when he was a kid that began telling him about dead girls and how to have intercourse with them and what it would be like. That's quite the imaginary friend. It's like the Sixth Sense, but way more cynical and disgusting. Apparently, he admitted to mental health professionals that he had these fantasies of necrophilia. I'm sure you know what it is. If you don't look it up too deeply. Don't go down the rabbit hole, because it's intercourse with the deceased. In 1995, he even admitted to fantasizing about killing the prosecutor on his case and his defense attorney, then using their bodies for his pleasure. Double yikes. The prison warned both of these women to stay far away from him. But there's more. When it came to what really happened to Vicki and probably why he stabbed Teresa back in 1980, it was all about necrophilia. The night Vicki died, he couldn't hold back any longer. His craving had increased, and normal intercourse just wasn't enough to satisfy this growing urge he had. When she got into his pickup, he swiftly punched her as hard as he could right in her stomach. As she hunched over in pain, he slipped a large zip tie around her neck and pulled it tightly until she was no longer able to breathe. Then he took her into those woods close by, and he had his way with her corpse. I'm disgusted. I'm appalled. This is just, And all this was being divulged to Detective Patterson, and the worst is yet to come. John said he regularly watched what's called psycho-thriller films, similar to snuff films, I guess, where guys strangle women and then have their way with the dead bodies. He then goes on to admit that when he drinks, that's what he wants to do to women. His inhibitions are diminished. He loses control. He claimed he had been drinking quite a bit the night before Halloween, having 4 to 5 beers, and then he began watching those types of movies. And don't be fooled. Even though John is telling this story, and that's how it happened, this was planned. His obsession with Rebekah had been growing over the years, and recently the urge to live out his fantasy on her was getting stronger. He knew what he was doing. He had been fantasizing about her for weeks and what he was going to do. He said that earlier that day, when he came over to visit Conway and Rebekah, he purposely left the back door to her trailer unlocked. Then he waited until he knew they would both be asleep around 2 a.m., and then he walked across the lawn to her trailer. Let's hear it from him. I'm standing at her back door. I remember that back door. Going in with the rubber mallet was clearly intentional, so was leaving her door unlocked. Drinking was something he did to get some liquid courage, it wasn't the other way around. But when the door opened and closed, Rebekah, who was a light sleeper and protective of her surroundings, woke up. She quickly jumped out of bed, looked out the window, and then started down the hall. When she came around the corner into the living area, he smashed her in the head with the mallet over and over again. He says he doesn't know how many times. As he was hitting her, she actually turned and looked at him, shocked, and said, "I know you." That's all she could mutter before collapsing onto the floor. And then John watched her. He said she was still breathing, and this next part is so sickening to me. He told the detectives he was looking at her, and I don't know if he said this out loud or to himself, but he goes, "Oh, I brought zip ties." Just listen to the way he says it, looking at her and saying, "Oh, I zip ties." For a moment, for a tiny moment, I thought he was going to show remorse or regret, but it wasn't that. It was an "oh" of excitement. She was still unconscious, but still breathing, and he slipped the zip tie around her neck and pulled it tight. Then he sat back on her couch and watched her struggle to breathe until she took her last breath. All this is happening while little Conway is asleep in his mother's bed. John then drags Rebekah onto the kitchen floor, removes her clothes, and disgustingly fulfills his fantasy. Even though, in the interview or interrogation, whatever you want to call it at this point, he claimed to the detectives, "Oh no, that didn't happen. I didn't get that far. I might have grabbed her chest and this and that. I couldn't get it up, I was having trouble. It wasn't as exciting as I thought it would be." But I'll let you know right now, he's lying. He's trying to make this look like less of a heinous act. Then he tried to clean up all the blood with spray cleaner and whatnot, and towels, and clearly he didn't do a good job. Then he grabbed her phone, turned it off, got her car keys, drove to an on-site dumpster, and threw away her phone inside, before parking her car at that bar and walking back to her trailer. He placed her bloody clothes and towels into a big construction garbage bag, and then stuffed her inside that bag as well. Then he carried her out to his pickup, but when he did, the bag ripped, and some of the items and blood spilled out into the back of his truck. During the 2-mile drive, he stopped 2 times, once to dispose of her body at the intersection of Picker Road and Coldwater Road, the same road the mobile home park was on, and then he drove to the next intersection at Picker and Woodruff, where he got rid of her clothing, the towels, and the mallet. He had more than one mallet in his trailer. The other one in his trailer was unused. Then, this monster told Patterson he drove back to Rebekah's trailer in time to get little Conway up and dressed to meet his father that morning. Can you even imagine that poor little boy? And John's okay with the thought that he just killed this child's mother? It's unreal to me. No one will actually ever know if Conway heard or had seen anything that night, but John claimed he was asleep the entire time, and I truly, truly hope so. As John was recounting all these details, there was a notable lack of remorse. His confession was chilling, not because of the acts themselves, but because of his calm and almost casual way of describing them. Patterson actually called him deplorable. This man had feigned concern. He led prayers for Rebekah at the church, knowing all along where she was, as her loved ones were desperate for answers. The officers on this case, Sheriff Mookie, Lieutenant Stoller, they hurried to where John confessed to disposing of everything, and it was clear he didn't even try to hide anything. The bloody towels and clothes were just lying there in a pile, the mallet tossed several feet away. It had dried blood and blonde hair still stuck on it. They recovered a bright green shirt, a pink towel, a pair of athletic shorts, and a couple of other white towels covered in blood. Rebekah's body was discovered lying behind tall pine trees in a ditch, right off the side of the road. She was lying face up, and she had clear ligature marks around her neck with a distinct little square in the front, consistent with the end of a zip tie. She was transported to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. Sheriff Mookie told the media that they were hoping for a miracle, but they knew as soon as they found her that this was never going to end the way that they wanted. The recovery of Rebekah's body was a devastating blow, not only to her family but to the entire community that had rallied to find her. Lieutenant Stoller said that even as a seasoned officer, this is not something you can ever prepare yourself for. You do your job, you investigate the crime, but when it comes to cases like this, where there's someone so close to the victim and you find out that they're the one who has done it, it shakes you to your core. And I have to agree, these are some of the scariest cases that I've ever researched. Now it was time to give John that phone call that he wanted. So Detective Patterson called Sally and told her that John wanted to speak to her. In the aftermath of John's confession, Sally was, of course, shattered. This was the man who promised to be there for her and her family. He watched over little Conway, who was a big part of their lives. And to learn that this man had not only betrayed their trust, but taken her daughter's life was too much to bear. And for what? For a few minutes of pleasure? We've heard this before. Sally was heartbroken, and her heartbreak was compounded by the knowledge that John had used his position at the church to fool everyone. She never suspected that he harbored such dark and violent desires, and she really struggled to come to terms with his dual nature. She once loved him, and now it just shows that her kindness and her compassion were taken advantage of. And that's something that I wrestle with understanding, because I don't understand how you could love her and then kill her daughter. But I also want to say, before you want to blame the congregation or Sally or anyone for allowing this monster near them, just know these criminals are good at hiding. If they weren't, they wouldn't be able to carry out these crimes in the first place. They're manipulative. They weasel their way into people's lives, gain their trust, and then they strike. So many spoke out, including his neighbors, the ones that he used to watch their 6 children. They were like, we would have never let him near our family. And it's chilling because John even made a statement to them about his past. He was standing in their kitchen, and he was like, oh, you wouldn't want to know me back then. I was like Charles Manson. When someone tells you something about them, believe it. Rebekah's co-workers said she was increasingly uncomfortable around him, to the point where she was actually considering moving out of her home. And when Aaron found out the truth, he was completely broken. He mentioned that as soon as Rebekah got her perm in her hair, John's attention on her increased. She told him that John was showing up at her work and acting strange, making comments about her appearance. And we know now that he'd been fantasizing about her for quite some time. Sally was, of course, so heartbroken. She said that Rebekah was so excited. She had just signed up for college and told her the night before. She was so excited, she said she wanted to be something in her life, and John stole all of that away from her. For what? Pleasure, fleeting pleasure. It's sick. Sally said that she first made contact with John on Halloween night in 2007 because she was lonesome. She was looking up people online, and John had been extremely nice to her. But over time, Rebekah and her other children didn't want to be around John. She said, evidently they saw what I couldn't see and I should have listened. That day, Sally called John's sister, and she got a sinking feeling when she heard Sally's voice. She sounded very upset. She told Chrissy they found Rebekah, she'd been murdered, and John confessed. Both ladies just cried and cried together on the phone. Chrissy was so shocked, and she felt horrible that poor Rebekah had gone through what she went through. It made her hate John. I mean, obviously. Like, I don't know, to me, I feel like I would have seen the signs. But then again, I don't know, because I don't have personal experience there. And this is when Chrissy finally realized that only an evil person could do something like this. That night, 200 people gathered outside of Rebekah's high school to remember her. Even her 11-year-old niece shared about her aunt, saying that a lot of times she would spend the night over at her aunt's house. They would have popcorn together, they would watch Spider-Man. Her name is Ariana, and she said that Rebekah was always a very good role model for her, and she taught her not to look at the bad things when something happened, but to focus on the good. But as for John, even this 11-year-old was wise enough to say she wouldn't forgive him, that his actions will be between himself and God. And it made me kind of cringe. When I heard Donna Hudson, who was in charge of hiring John as a pastor, She remarked that even though this had been a horrendous week, there were blessings in the midst of all of it. She asked that the hands that held them up now hold Sally up. But I'm thinking, where are the blessings? Because I guess I wasn't there to witness them. To me, it just seemed like she didn't want to take responsibility for allowing this man into the church. Aren't there background checks for positions like this? I know it's a small church, but that seems like a position of power that needs oversight. As far as Donna was concerned, she said that John was doing a lot of good and that Satan did not want him doing good, so Satan got to him. She also mentioned that, even though Christians are supposed to forgive, she couldn't forgive him at that point. She thought it might take a few weeks, but I don't think I ever could. The autopsy report concluded there was blunt force trauma to Rebekah's head and body, but her cause of death was strangulation. There were clear signs she had been violated. There were abrasions and things like that in that area. I'm not going to go into detail. John lied when he said he didn't act out his fantasies on her. Not surprisingly, John sent a letter to his sister while he was in jail waiting for trial. This is what it read. Dear Chrissy, I want to tell you how much I miss you. I love you dearly, Chrissy, and I do understand how pissed off at me you must be. I know what a disappointment I am to so many people, and I am so sorry. Chrissy said that was the first time she had ever heard John say he was sorry, but she didn't believe it. She thought he was only sorry he got caught. He was actually hoping they could talk one day, but she wasn't going to speak with him again because she knew it would just be another excuse, another story. What reason, what justification could he possibly give for this? None. He called her every day, sometimes more than once, but she refused to speak with him and did not attend his trial. Rebekah's celebration of life was on November 6th at Homer United Methodist Church. Aaron's sister, Teresa, mentioned how her brother had gotten Rebekah an engagement ring. The fact that she never knew about it broke Teresa's heart, but she thanked her brother for bringing Rebekah into their lives. Aaron's mother, Lisa Quinn, couldn't believe any human could do something so evil. Her family was still in shock, especially because Rebekah was just so loving and kind, and her son Aaron was devastated. Lisa was most upset that Conway would never see his mom again. He sleeps with her every night. How are you going to tell him that someone you trusted did this to his mother? There's still a shocking turn of events coming. But first, John took a plea deal after a psychiatrist evaluated him and determined he was fit to stand trial, so the insanity defense wouldn't work this time. The 55-year-old, a third-time offender, signed an agreement on Wednesday, March 27, 2013, pleading guilty to second-degree murder. At his sentencing, Sally spoke with her other daughter, Deborah, by her side. She said, "I stand here today to be the voice of Rebekah, because she no longer has a voice." She asked why he was ever let out of prison twice. Sally also mentioned that her 4-year-old son, Conway, would suffer the most and that John showed no mercy for Rebekah, so she wanted the court not to show any mercy for him. John just sat there in his orange jumpsuit, shackled in chains, his beard hanging long and ungroomed. He looked so evil and still showed no emotion. On August 28th, just a few months later, John's sister got a call. For some reason, in her heart, she already knew what it would be about. An officer informed her that John had taken his own life. He'd hung himself in his cell. She wasn't fazed. The brother she once knew had already died years ago. The man she saw in court pictures wasn't the same. She was so glad her parents weren't alive to see any of this play out. She said he deserved to rot in hell, and I tend to agree. I don't think he deserves to go anywhere good, if such a place exists. I think he's in the other place. In the aftermath of Rebekah's murder, many questioned how a man like John could have been allowed to walk free. How could the system fail, not once, but twice, to protect the public from such a violent man? The answer lies in the inadequacies of the legal system at the time. For Conway, the impact of his mother's death would be lifelong. Too young to fully understand at the time, he was left in the care of his father and extended family. The joyful days he had spent with his mom, playing with scarecrows and picking out Halloween costumes, would fade as he grew older. Conway wouldn't grasp the tragedy's depth for years. but the trauma would shape his future in ways no one could yet predict. Nadia seemingly vanished from her on-campus dorm room during her second semester of her first year at Carleton University. She was intelligent, hardworking, and had received a scholarship for her academic success. But then, one snowy night, she was gone. As the mystery unraveled, it got more and more sinister. Now, let me tell you her story. I'd like to introduce you to Nadia Mana Suzanne Kajuji. She was born in Brampton, Ontario, Canada, to her parents, mother Deborah Chevalier, who went by Dede, and her father Mohammed Kajuji. Nadia was born on June 8, 1989. Her two middle names were in honor of her family. Mana was her grandmother, and Suzanne was her aunt. Nadia's older half-brother Mark was 11 by the time Nadia was born. They shared the same father, and even though that's quite a significant age gap, it didn't stop Mark and his new little sister from becoming very close. Nadia was a joy to her family from the day she was born. You could say she was quite the daddy's girl. Mohammed was just in awe of how beautiful his daughter was. Deborah said she found her purpose when Nadia was born, and she promised that her daughter would always know how much she was loved. Both Deborah and Mohammed were dedicated to giving both Nadia and Mark everything they needed to have a full life, and they were two parents who were very involved in their children's lives. Let's take a look at what living in Brampton, Ontario is like. Brampton is a city in southern Ontario, Canada. It's located in the Greater Toronto area, and for reference, it's across Lake Ontario from New York City. Right here, in case you're like me and from the US and want to relate it to where we are. Brampton is the 9th largest city in Canada and the largest city in the Greater Toronto area outside of Toronto itself. There are about 500,000 residents, and this was around 2008, which will be an important time frame for this case. Now there are over 600,000 residents in this area today. Brampton is known for its diverse population, its thriving economy, and its many parks and green spaces. It's also one of Canada's fastest-growing cities. Nadia's father immigrated here from Morocco. Here's the home where the family lived. It's such a pretty street, lined with really nice houses. The area they lived in is very residential and surrounded by lush greenery, lots of trees, parks, and outdoor recreation. Deborah and Mohammed were invested in providing Nadia with a well-rounded childhood. They went on outings to parks and petting zoos, which probably inspired Nadia's love for animals, and they introduced her to many activities that would shape who she would become. Here she is with her brother, sitting on the rocks near a lake, having lunch or feeding the seagulls, or maybe both. And here's little Nadia, riding a pony at a fair. She looks like she might be around 3 in this picture, with a pacifier still in her mouth. Nadia was also very fashionable from a young age. Look at her outfits. This floral one, it's so on point from head to toe, all the way from the hat to the cute matching sandals. And this one, the patchwork vest, the red flowers to match on the straw hat. Whoever was responsible for these cute ensembles did a great job, and it was probably Deborah, so props to her. Nadia was also very fashionable from a young age. Look at her outfits. This floral one, it's so on point from head to toe, all the way from the hat to the cute matching sandals. I love this pretty outfit, and the ponytail with the rose embroidery on the collar. It's obvious that Nadia was adored by her family. Her parents were thrilled to explore with her, teach her new things, and instill values in her. This all showed as she grew into her own person over time. As a child, Nadia displayed intelligence and wit that exceeded her years. While she stood out as smarter than most kids her age, that characteristic didn't overshadow her joyful personality. She loved making friends. She was a very cheerful little girl, creative, curious, and always ready for a new adventure or challenge. Mark liked taking Nadia to the mall and playing laser tag together. They also played video games, went go-karting, took trips to see movies, and just spent time together. Nadia used to listen to the Backstreet Boys and would make fun of Mark and laugh whenever he attempted to sing along to her favorite songs when they were driving around town or hanging out together. Among Nadia's other interests growing up was karate. She developed strength, self-discipline, self-defense skills, and mental focus through practicing karate. She also enjoyed swimming, and eventually, she even picked up a job as a paper carrier, learning all about responsibility and hard work. Every day, she would wake up early in the morning, rain or shine, to deliver newspapers to the residents of Brampton. Nadia made a lot of friends in her neighborhood and blossomed as she went into high school at Harold M. Brathwaite Secondary School, about 20 minutes from her home. She had pretty, shiny brown hair, hazel green eyes, and was outgoing and popular. But most of all, she excelled academically. She was the epitome of an overachiever. She was determined to be the best and strived for perfection. Just getting by with passing grades was not enough. She was her biggest critic. She wanted the best grades so that she could one day become an attorney. But as much as her studies were at the forefront of her goals, her social life was also very important to her. She definitely enjoyed hanging out with friends and dating as well. She liked to wear hats, match her clothing, and dress up in costumes. Halloween was her favorite holiday. Fall was her favorite season. Same here. She won an award for best costume in grade school when she dressed up as a toilet, which I thought was really cute. Nadia loved when nature began to shift from summer to autumn, with all the leaves falling to the ground. Carving pumpkins into jack-o'-lanterns was one of her favorite pastimes. She continued the tradition every year, sometimes carving more than one. She was very creative. As much as friends and boyfriends became more of a priority, Nadia was still very close to her parents. And part of that was because they really liked to keep an eye on her. Maybe they weren't quite helicopter parents, but they were definitely interested in being a big part of their daughter's life. However, as many teens do, Nadia yearned for more and more independence to carve out her own place in the world. Before she became an adult, Nadia joined the Royal Canadian Sea Cadets. This is a national youth program for Canadians aged 12 to 18 years old. It's a program that offers a variety of fun activities that challenge you, all revolving around seamanship, sailing, and the deep-rooted traditions of the Royal Canadian Navy. I looked into this. It's almost like Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts on steroids, if you know what I mean. The skills learned are very impressive. Nadia not only participated in the Royal Canadian Sea Cadets, but she was also honored by the Navy League of Canada. She was given an Award of Excellence medal in 2005 at the age of 16 in recognition of exemplary personal dress, deportment, knowledge, and skill in cadet training, not to mention exceptional leadership qualities. Here she is in this picture, the only one with a big smile on her face. She was a force to be reckoned with, as they say, and in her case, it really was true. Her brother said she also had a bit of a smart mouth, but that was because she was very intelligent and liked to challenge other people's thoughts, opinions, and beliefs, which they thought would make her a good lawyer. One of her friends from 8th grade described her as different, brilliant, and special. Back on August 14, 2004, there was a major power outage that left 50 million people in the Northeast without power. Nadia was at one of her mom's friends' houses that night. It was the worst blackout in history, and you know what Nadia decided to do? She took her mom's friend's kids and set up a telescope to look at Mars. She took that opportunity to learn and to teach, because that's the kind of person she was. Nadia was also an exceptional writer. She wrote poems all the time, and they were deep and emotional, touching on themes of life's meaning, purpose, and her own perspective on love, pain, and humanity. She sang, she played guitar, she was a creative. She even performed Wish You Were Here at her high school's arts night in 2004 when she was in 10th grade. As a creative, she not only used pen and paper to showcase her art, she used her body as a canvas. She had a pierced eyebrow, a pierced tongue, and a tattoo of a geometric bat on her lower right stomach. I also liked her dark eyeliner. It was giving off a lot of eccentric vibes, which I'm a huge fan of. Overall, Nadia was just a beautiful young woman who was becoming more and more of her own person as the years went on. During high school, Nadia applied for a college scholarship through the Canadian Federation of University Women's Scholarships and Fellowships. It's for women who are pursuing higher education, and there are only about 10 to 13 awarded every year. And you probably guessed it, Nadia was one of the recipients of this award. Here is her letter congratulating her, which read in part, "Dear Nadia, congratulations on being selected as Harold M. Brathwaite's recipient of the Canadian Federation of University Women's Scholarship. In selecting an award winner, your teachers were asked to consider academic achievement and involvement in student activities. Your record in both areas was considered worthy of recognition. Well done." That's another thing I forgot to mention. Nadia gave back to her community. She dedicated her time and energy to those in need, particularly at the local soup kitchen. Every Saturday she would spend time feeding the less fortunate in her community, and her compassionate nature extended beyond humans. As I mentioned, she cared deeply for animals as well. Nadia was an outstanding person and student. After receiving the scholarship, it was time for her to choose a university to attend. Her parents, of course, were hoping that it was somewhere close by, but Nadia had different plans. As much as she loved and respected both of her parents, she wanted to explore a new place, meet new people, and not be under their watchful eyes. After all, she had earned this. Nadia was an outstanding person and student, award-winning. Her mother called her a shining star. Deborah said that Nadia was well-adjusted, happy, and confident. Though it would be hard to be away from her, she knew that Nadia would thrive, and it was time to let everything her mom and dad taught her be put into practice as an adult. Nadia applied and was accepted to Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, a 5-hour drive from her hometown. Her brother Moore commented that Carleton University was far enough away that her parents wouldn't just show up on a whim, knocking on her dorm room door, but close enough to fly or drive for a visit, so they could often spend holidays and important moments together. Being as close as she was with her dad, he understood why Nadia wanted to go away to college. She told him she didn't want him checking in on her constantly. She wanted the freedom of being 18, an adult and a grown-up in her own right. Mohammed acknowledged that he and Nadia's mother had always been very protective of their daughter. They wanted to ensure her safety and well-being, and that sounds reasonable. But I can also understand Nadia's desire to have a little taste of freedom within the confines of a very safe university. Plus, it is a beautiful campus, and I can definitely see the appeal. It's the perfect place for college students with lots to do. Carleton University has a 150-acre campus located west of Old Ottawa South, a small, historic neighborhood in Canada's capital. This area is home to many professors and students, and it's also one of Ottawa's most politically progressive neighborhoods. The campus sits along the Rideau River, which is 146 kilometers long, about 91 miles, and winds through Ottawa. The river begins flowing from the upper Rideau Lake, shown here on this map in relation to the university, and empties into the Ottawa River at the Rideau Falls, a beautiful waterfall only 60 minutes from campus. That horseshoe-shaped river flows out through 2 dams, which were built to channel water into a man-made canal on the river's east bank. This canal was made during the construction of the Rideau Canal, a popular attraction near the campus. The Rideau Canal transforms into an ice skating rink during the winter, stretching a Guinness World Record-setting 7.8 kilometers, around 5 miles, making it the world's largest ice rink. The canal, 202 kilometers long, 125 miles, runs from Kingston to Ottawa and winds through Ottawa's downtown. This unique skateway typically opens from January to early March, weather permitting. It's free, accessible 7 days a week, and open 24 hours a day. How fun would that be? Probably because I don't have anything like that here in California. It's bustling and festive at night, a romantic, lively place, and a great reason to visit this area. With a beautiful setting and historic buildings that look like castles, the canal area attracts students, residents, and tourists all year round for walking, hiking, running, and biking. It's one of Ottawa's oldest landmarks and a popular place for students to take a stroll during their breaks. This was an exciting time for Nadia, who began her freshman year in the first week of September 2007, right around her 18th birthday. She was a public affairs and policy management major, which involved studying the relationships between governments, organizations, and the public. Carleton University provided Deborah and Mohammed with a sense of security, assuring them that their daughter would be well supported on campus. The university offered various resources for students, including medical services, counseling, and on-campus security, which meant that Nadia would rarely need to leave campus for anything urgent. Carleton also has a strong academic reputation, particularly in journalism, public affairs, international affairs, architecture, and technology. This was just after the tech boom, the year the iPhone debuted. Though many of us were still using iPods to listen to music, Nadia included, social media platforms like MySpace were on the rise, and more young people were using these sites to connect. Nadia kept in touch with family and friends on Facebook and MySpace, and her phone was always by her side. Texting was becoming the norm, with talking on the phone less common, and the internet was connecting more people than ever. Around this time, YouTube was also becoming more popular, not only as a place to watch videos, but to share your own. It's the second most visited website, only after Google, and here you are, probably watching YouTube. Being social was something Nadia was doing a lot of at Carleton. Once she moved into her dorm room in Prescott Hall, she met all of her building suite mates. No one shared an actual room with her, but they were on the same floor, which consisted of communal areas to hang out in and events that residents could attend to network and meet other students. Nadia didn't have any trouble meeting friends, whether they were male or female. Her suite mates described Nadia as genuinely happy. She had a vibrant personality and was always up for an adventure. In addition to her outgoing nature, They were impressed by Nadia's intelligence. It was clear to them that Nadia possessed a very sharp mind and was very eager to learn. They had no doubt that Nadia was destined for great achievements in her future. She began going out more, partying and drinking. She wasn't a heavy drinker, but she liked wine, vodka, and rye mixed drinks, like Belvedere, I think. I've never actually tried it, but she was doing what college kids usually do. There are plenty of pictures of Nadia dressing up, smiling with friends, and of course, holding the famous or infamous red Solo cups in hand. Nadia strived to have an unforgettable experience at Carleton University. When she wasn't studying all night, she enjoyed shopping at the nearby mall, going to frat parties, and meeting new people. This is where Nadia lived, Prescott House, an on-campus residence. It was great for students living away from home for the first time, and many college campuses require you to spend 1 year in the dorm so you can get acclimated to the school and other students. It's a great way to transition, with lots of help from your RAs. They have amenities available and rules so that you maintain a school-life balance. Prescott House consisted of what they called suites. They have a full-size fridge, microwave, meal prep area, and each suite has 4 single bedrooms and shares 2 bathrooms, so you would be there with 3 other people in your little suite. The rooms are also very close together. I was able to find some videos online of these suites, so I just want you to take a look at how close in proximity her suite mates really were to her. There are 400 students living in this residence. It has 7 floors and combines freshmen and upperclassmen. This is what one of the rooms looks like. They provide you with a desk, a bookshelf, a bed, a window, and some closet space. And that's about it. It's kind of sterile, like a doctor's office. Muhammad and Deborah came to visit her just a few weeks into Nadia's first semester. They wanted to see how things were going, and they took her shopping. They got her groceries, everyday necessities, and it seemed like she was really settling in. She was making new friends and already enjoying her classes, but soon her parents became aware that there was something brewing beneath the surface. Nadia was heartbroken. She had been in a long-term relationship with her boyfriend before she attended Carleton, but as soon as she got busy during her first semester, things changed. I don't have those details, but her boyfriend ended the relationship, and this was really hard on Nadia. There were so many changes in such a short amount of time, but she was resilient and immersed herself in college life, her classes, and her friends. One of those friends was a close friend named Luke Rivet. Nadia met him in their French class, and they connected right away. Luke remembered seeing Nadia for the first time and, of course, was in awe of her physical beauty, but even more impressed by her intellect and caring personality. He thought, wow, are all the women at Carleton going to be like this? But of course, Nadia was very special. She and Luke spent a lot of time together, talking and sharing with each other, lending an ear to listen to each other's struggles and triumphs, either on the phone, in person, or over text. Eventually, Nadia ended up in another romantic relationship, not with Luke, but by the end of the first semester, it had gotten a bit complicated, and that relationship ended as well. So, going into the winter break when Nadia went back home to visit her parents for the holidays, she definitely seemed to have a lot on her mind, which is understandable. But she wasn't the type to share intimate details with everyone. She preferred to express herself through poetry and write in her diary. She would record all of her thoughts, emotions, perspectives on life, everything in that diary. Her diary meant a lot to her, and she kept it in a very safe place where it wouldn't be easily accessible. She also began to keep a journal on her laptop, another prized possession, like many of us have. Nadia spent a lot of time on her computer and her phone, with her headphones in, listening to music on her iPod. One of her favorite songs was Bittersweet Symphony by The Verve. If you know, you know. This song meant a lot to Nadia, and you may be able to relate to. T.I was one of those songs that you would play over and over again on repeat. Nadia really loved spending time listening to music and studying. You could find her in her dorm room, doing just that for hours and hours on end. Her suite mates always knew when Nadia was there because they could hear her music, especially when it wasn't playing through her headphones, but instead out of her computer. In the new year, in 2008, Nadia was back in classes and striving for perfection. She had a very heavy workload. Her schedule was packed, so she spent a lot of time studying. She and her suite mates, of course, would check in on one another to see how things were going, offer support, hang out, or just go out together to get away. Let's jump forward to later that year. It was March of 2008. The winter season starts in December and stretches through March in Ottawa, and it can be brutal. So even if students wanted to venture out of the dorms, there wasn't much to do in the freezing cold. I'm talking snowstorms bringing in snow that's waist-high in some areas. Of course, there's ice skating, as I mentioned, but the daily temperature is 6 degrees Fahrenheit, that's negative 14 degrees Celsius. The winter was finally almost over. Once the middle of April comes along, the ice begins to thaw, and it warms up, leading into the spring and summer months, and that is a lot of fun. It wasn't uncommon not to see students out and about because it was really cold. But on the morning of March 10th, one of Nadia's suite mates became concerned. She noticed Nadia's music playing loudly the night before, and it didn't stop until the late hours of the night. It continued all the way into the next morning when she came out of her room. So as I explained, Nadia had a habit of listening to music and studying in her room, but it just seemed off. I'm sure we all know that feeling. Something just seemed off about it. Knowing that Nadia often enjoyed studying while listening to music, her suite mates initially dismissed it as her typical behavior. However, the volume was unusually high, and it seemed excessive, even by Nadia's standards. So when the suite mate knocked on her door and got no answer, she thought that was strange. She tried to open it, but it was locked. At that point, she realized, you know what? I haven't seen Nadia for at least a day or so. I'm sure if you've been in college, music like that coming from someone's room while you're trying to do things probably wasn't pleasant. But, of course, she was also concerned for her friend, worried that something might be wrong. They grew more determined to gain entry to her room, so they ended up calling campus security. The security guard came up to Nadia's room, listened, heard the music, knocked on the door, and didn't get an answer, just like the suite mates. The music was still going. It was playing loudly. Bittersweet Symphony was on repeat. The security guard decided to get a master key and unlock Nadia's door. When they entered her room, they saw her laptop. It was powered on, open but locked. Her music was playing, but Nadia wasn't there. Everything was in its place, or so it seemed. It looked like she had just stepped out for a moment with the intention of coming right back. But where was she? After security asked Nadia's roommates if they had seen her, they all said they hadn't seen her in about a day. The head of security decided to reach out to Nadia's parents. Perhaps she had a family emergency and had to leave campus right away, going home without time to come back and grab all of her things. But it did seem a bit odd that her wallet with her license was still inside the room, and her phone wasn't there either, implying she had taken it with her. The head of security called Muhammad later that afternoon and asked if he knew where his daughter was. He said no. He thought she was at Carleton. The security officer informed him that no one had seen her in almost 2 days. Muhammad was shocked. He couldn't believe his daughter hadn't been heard from for 2 days, and that he was only now being notified. Muhammad and Deborah immediately stopped what they were doing and took the 5-hour, 300-mile drive to campus to look for their daughter. Everyone had been reaching out to her, but she wasn't answering her phone or text messages. That night, her phone began going straight to voicemail, which was even more concerning. This just wasn't like Nadia. She kept in touch with her friends and family and wouldn't leave without telling someone where she was going. Her mother talked to her regularly and had no idea where Nadia could be. Once her parents arrived at the university late Monday, they got in touch with the security department as well as Nadia's suite mates. Everyone was trying to piece together the last time they remembered seeing her. One of the girls said she heard the sound of Nadia's door closing between 11:20 and 11:30 on Sunday, the 9th. This was the same girl who found it odd when she woke up the next morning and heard the music still playing. Another student recalled seeing Nadia leaving the dorm around 11:30 p. that same night. However, these two eyewitness accounts weren't entirely reliable. The suite mate hadn't actually seen Nadia, she only heard her door close. And the other student wasn't 100% sure they saw Nadia that night. It could have been another night. Nadia's parents didn't know what to think. Many thoughts were going through their minds. There had been a bad snowstorm on Sunday night. Over a foot of snow fell, and it was already very cold and snowy with freezing conditions. It was also daylight saving time. So on Sunday, March 9th, 2008, at 2 a.m., everyone moved their clocks 1 hour forward to 3 a.m. About 10 hours had possibly gone by without Nadia being in contact with anyone. So of course Muhammad and Deborah reached out to everyone they knew who knew their daughter. But being in college, she had made so many new friends that her parents didn't know or recognize. This is an important aspect of the case. Once someone becomes an adult, things change, especially in terms of what they share with their parents and the information others share about them with their parents. In grade school, schools contact parents immediately about issues, but once someone is an adult, there's no obligation to keep a parent informed on anything, and that will come into play as you will see. Nadia's parents were under the impression that the university had strong security measures in place, and there were some. For example, everyone had a key card with their picture and name on it, which granted access to their residence hall and other authorized areas. The system tracked each swipe. There were also CCTV cameras on campus, but it turned out many of them didn't even record. They were just surveillance cameras that security could monitor in real time, which isn't helpful if something happened at another time. The cameras that did record weren't even in places you'd want them, like outside of the suites or in hallways. Instead, they were just scattered in locations like the front doors to buildings. This makes sense, but more cameras were needed, especially outside the dorm buildings. If anything happened to Nadia after she stepped out of Prescott Hall, they wouldn't know, and that was disheartening. Plus, at this point, no investigation was going on. Students leave campus all the time, and Nadia was an adult, so it was left to her parents to find her. They set out to search everywhere in the surrounding area of the dorm, and further. If she had left her dorm that night, she might have gotten caught in the storm. On Tuesday, March 11th, Mohammed and Deborah began their search for their daughter. They walked all around campus and the surrounding areas, including malls, popular locations where students hung out, and tourist spots, hoping that someone, just someone, would recognize Nadia and provide them with information about where she could be. Mohammed didn't even want to tell Mark that his sister was missing, because, at this point, he was really hoping that she was going to turn up. He didn't want to worry him, but after 16 hours of searching, they were no closer to understanding where she was. Someone did come forward, saying that they thought they saw Nadia at an on-campus cafeteria called Oasis, buying pizza at 8:40 p.m. on Sunday night. Still, that's the same night that we're already aware that Nadia had at least been heard in her dorm room, her music, her door closing, and possibly seen leaving. No one had any information after Sunday. She did not show up for her classes on Monday either. By Wednesday, the 12th, it was finally time for security at the university to take this more seriously. It was at that point that they reached out for assistance from the authorities at the Ottawa Police Department. It had been 3 days now, with no signs of Nadia. First things first, the police wanted to gather information about things like what Nadia looked like. She was described as being of Mediterranean descent, 5 feet 8 inches tall, 130 pounds, medium build, with hazel eyes, shoulder-length brown hair with blonde streaks, an eyebrow ring, and a tongue ring. She had dark skin and a tattoo on her right stomach in the shape of a bat. Of course, they relayed all that information that we already know about everything they heard from the suite maids and the head of security, as well as telling the police about Nadia's character, because that's important. She was a bright young woman, a responsible and hard-working student, and this wasn't like her. Now, Nadia's case was in the hands of the police. The first thing they did was search Nadia's single dorm room for clues, and they took inventory of the items that were there. The room wasn't big. It didn't take long for them to search. It's not like she brought everything from home. We're talking about a small dorm room we saw examples of. There wasn't much to look for, but they did take notes. Her wallet was still there, which included her license, and it had over $200 in cash in there. Her bus tickets were inside, but her school ID was not found, and neither was her cell phone. I told you her laptop was open and locked, and as they looked at that lock screen, they could see the desktop of her computer. It was just kind of like faded out, and it appeared as though her email was open. Nadia's room seemed frozen in time. It gave the unsettling impression that Nadia had left in a hurry, leaving important items behind with the expectation of returning right away. The atmosphere was thick with unanswered questions, and the police didn't have much to go on. There was no evidence of a struggle, no forced entry into the room. It had been locked behind her as she left. When her suite mates were interviewed, they said that things were normal with Nadia. They didn't hear or see anything out of the ordinary. Even the music was ordinary. She would frequently play that song, Bittersweet Symphony, on repeat. They all spent a significant amount of time in their own rooms studying and working on things for school. They also provided police with the names of other students that they knew hung out with Nadia, like Luke Rivet, who we know was very close with her. Next was reaching out to all of Nadia's friends. At the same time, Nadia's sudden disappearance had become real to her parents. She was missing, it was devastating, and it was time to notify her brother about what was going on. It was after midnight before Muhammad had the chance to text his son. All he said was, "Nadia is missing." Mark, half asleep, saw the text. He was rubbing his eyes, saying, "What? What is going on?" And that's exactly what Mark texted back, "What?" Then he sent another text asking, "What do you mean she's missing?" I can't even imagine getting a message like that. It gives me the chills thinking about it. Mark got out of bed, trying to collect his thoughts, and he was rereading his father's text messages. "Nadia is missing." Then another text came through. It said, "Nadia has not been seen in 3 days." Mark was shocked. He was confused. He was like, "What do you mean that she hasn't been seen for 3 days?" He wasn't understanding. He just didn't know what to think. Where was his sister? Of course, Mark and his father spoke about all the details that were known at that time, but there wasn't much. Mark was filled with disbelief. The gravity of the situation hit him hard. He knew that he had to get to his parents' side as soon as possible, so later that day, he took the drive to Carleton University. He made that 5-hour drive in about 3, obviously not exactly going the speed limit, but he didn't care. He said if he was going to get pulled over, he figured this was a good reason to get there fast. Time is always of the essence in a case like this when someone goes missing. He thought if anyone would understand, it would be the police. When he connected with his dad and Deborah, they brainstormed what they could do. They checked Nadia's bank account. It didn't have any recent activity. She didn't have a credit card, so they wondered how far she would be able to get without her license, her car, her wallet, and money. It really looked like she vanished out of thin air. But they couldn't help but think that Nadia might have been taken, that she had been forced against her will, and that she did not choose to leave. But what if she did? That crossed their minds as well. Could she have just wanted to get away? Even though it didn't seem like her, it was a possibility. Anything was possible at this point. So they banded together to start their own search in the nearby areas. At this point, additional family members came out to Carleton, including her aunt. They had missing persons flyers made, with a picture of Nadia, her description, and all the information about when and where she was last seen. They spread out and passed out flyers all day, every day. Later, they got a chance to gain access to Nadia's dorm room. It was their first time inside. What stuck out was that police had said, "Oh, we searched and we took an inventory of anything of evidentiary value," yet there was her laptop, open and locked, with what appeared to be an email on the screen, like she had just sent out a message. The police hadn't even collected her laptop for analysis. That seemed really confusing to her family. But remember, as an adult, the police were under the impression that, without evidence otherwise, Nadia might have just run away on her own. It's not as though they had a crime scene, for example. But I agree, not taking the laptop does seem like an oversight, and Nadia's family was not happy. They felt like they had a lack of support from the Ottawa police. Her parents were essentially leading this investigation. They had boots on the ground. They were asking people in the community if they had seen her. They were going all over the city looking for her, hoping that somehow it was true that she had just left for a couple of days to decompress because of her college workload. The police basically told them that what they do is ask the public for help first. They see if they can get any tips to lead them in a direction. So that's what they were doing. The police were reaching out to media and reporters, and they even did interviews with Nadia's mom and dad. By March 14th, the first article about Nadia's disappearance was posted by the Ottawa Citizen newspaper. It talked about how Muhammad and Deborah were in the city that they were unfamiliar with, and they were frantically searching for their daughter. The couple had made their way to the Rideau Center, a place where they were told that teenagers liked to hang out. They described their daughter as chatty, outgoing, fun-loving, and someone who loved to go shopping. So they were hoping that they would see her in that crowd, but they didn't. The newspaper also posted this picture of Nadia. By now, many of her close friends had been informed that she had been missing. Sergeant Peter Lunigar of the Missing Persons Unit was assigned to Nadia's case. He told the Ottawa Citizen that she didn't tell anyone where she was going, and she had never done anything like this before. It was very out of character. However, that wasn't exactly true, and we're going to get to that in a moment. The sergeant had already spoken to a few of Nadia's friends who informed him that they had spoken to her that weekend, and she posted on Facebook the night she was last seen. The article also revealed that Deborah had spoken to her daughter about a week before she disappeared, but Nadia was very busy with classes, and Deborah knew she needed to give her space. She didn't think anything of it when she didn't hear from her over the week. Her friend Luke was also interviewed by the paper. He told the reporter that Nadia was, quote, a caring person, a loving person, and she sticks up for what she believes in. She's stunningly beautiful, and she's intelligent," end quote. Muhammad said while sobbing, "I haven't slept for 2 days, and I haven't eaten for 2 days. I can't stop crying day and night, thinking of her in this weather with no money and no food. I know the longer time goes by, the less chance of finding her alive, especially in this weather." Mark was very concerned about his father. He had never seen him like this. I have some news clips of Muhammad desperately passing out flyers begging the public to come forward if they know anything. This man is broken, and as a parent, a sister, and a friend, it's hard to watch. I can feel his pain, and I'm sure you can see how heartbroken he was. Hundreds of people began coming forward to aid the search for Nadia. Over the next few days, they had helicopters circling the area, and there were canines brought out to try to locate her scent. Muhammad and Deborah were out there every single day for hours and hours, no matter how bad the weather was. Muhammad was doing interview after interview on news stations. He was on TV, on multiple channels, begging the public for help. When he was asked if he thought there was any chance that Nadia left on her own, he said, "She wouldn't even go out in the rain, so he couldn't imagine that she would go out in snow like this. She hadn't taken any money out of her bank account, so it just didn't make sense." He couldn't make it make sense. She was way too smart not to be prepared if that was her decision to leave. Mark, being her brother and maybe closer to understanding a teenager than his parents, thought if she did leave, maybe she went to hang out with someone to get some fresh air. It wouldn't be hard to imagine that something happened to her in that snowstorm. There were so many places that she could be. She could be in a ditch underneath the snow. He was actually hoping that she did leave on her own, that she just decided, in his words, to take a bus to Miami or something. He didn't want the truth to be something more sinister. There were moments when her family even hoped she had been taken, because then there was a chance she was still alive. But if she was under that snow somewhere, stuck because of that storm, that is what their nightmare was. However, just as Muhammad had said, days went on, and it got harder to hold on to that hope. A Facebook group was created around this time. It was called Nadia Kajuji Help Us Locate Her. Her story was gaining traction. It was all over the Toronto news, including City News, Toronto Star, Toronto Sun, CTV News, and more. Many people were coming to that Facebook page to provide clues, assumptions, and even suggestions. One suggestion was to contact the psychic named Robert Lindblad, who apparently was very well known in the area for being able to help families of missing people. The family was desperate, so Mark, being part of the Facebook group, did reach out to that psychic. He was hoping that he could get something useful from him. Anything. Apparently this medium, the psychic, ran a free international service to find the whereabouts of missing children and their kidnappers and murderers. That's what's on his website right here. But then, on that site it says it's $10 a question, so it's a little bit confusing. It's very out of date, so I have no idea if this guy is still in business today. Luke Rivet was also interviewed by the police, and there was something very interesting he revealed. Though he and Nadia were very close friends, he wanted to be more. He was actually in love with her. He said that he never told her about his feelings, but at the time that she went missing, he admitted that they were in an argument. He had betrayed her trust by reading her diary, and that's understandable. That could very well be considered a violation to someone, to get a peek at your deepest thoughts without your consent. I can see why Luke would be compelled to do so, considering he wanted to be with Nadia. So maybe he wanted to know how she felt before he put himself out there. But this had occurred a day or so before she went missing. He could have been one of the last people to see her. Luke turned over his cell phone. Police saw that Nadia sent him at least 47 text messages that Sunday night prior to her not being seen in her dorm room. 19-year-old Luke had also admitted that the last time he saw her was the day before she went missing. According to him, they took a walk on Rideau Canal Park. She was angry with him, he said, that they just talked and walked and shared. It was beautiful out there, and he didn't want to assume the worst. He said, you know, she just might need time away from people. Well, all that sounds a little suspicious, and when Nadia's family heard this, they thought so too. Here's this guy who has deep feelings for her, went through her very personal diary. She's upset before she disappeared, and then he was with her the day prior. He wasn't coming forward to speak to them about any of it. Why, they wondered. What had he read in that diary, and where was it? The leather-bound journal had not been found in her dorm room, and that seemed odd too. Why would that be missing? There was a lot being speculated in that Facebook group, which then had 500 members. Speaking of Facebook, there had not been any activity on Nadia's account since the night she went missing. and her last post was very eerie. It left everyone with even more questions. It read, "Nadia will someday be loved." Why was she referring to herself in the third person? Was this really her that posted this? She was loved. It was clear from the effort that everyone who loved her was putting in to find her. Mark wrote this in the Facebook group. "My biggest frustration right now is the fact that my life and financial obligations are taking a priority over searching for my sister. I love my job very much, and I find it as a form of therapy. But as each day goes by and new information surfaces, I just leave for Ottawa. I feel trapped at times when people want to talk or send emails or want to do interviews because I've made a commitment to my team. These past 3 days have been a great way to see if I'm able to work with my mind racing in many directions. I have 2 days off and need to utilize those to get my head straight." Finally, the police have some concrete information to share. The lock on Nadia's door was engaged at 9:41 p.m., according to the security system in her dorm room. They also seized her laptop and were analyzing it. It was also reported that one of the security officers said that weekend he himself got stuck in thigh-high snow and he needed assistance to get out. That was not positive news. The storm was really bad that night, and the snow was still on the ground, making it hard to search certain areas. Nadia's family was disappointed with how long it took for police to even conduct a ground search at all, and it still wasn't done. They were going out there trying to search every day. Video footage was retrieved from some of the cameras, but it was so grainy and dark that you couldn't make out models of cars in the parking lot or driving by, and there was hardly anyone on foot in that area. However, there were some taxis seen on the footage. According to Nadia's mom in a post in the Facebook group, she said, "There's only one taxi company that has the rights to pick up from the university, and I find it very disappointing that the police made no attempt to contact that company to find out which drivers were working that night, the night that she disappeared. Bus drivers and taxi drivers can serve as a wealth of information. We went to the cab company ourselves, and the lady there expressed surprise and concern that the police had not been by. If Nadia was on foot, a cab driver very well may have noticed a pedestrian and what direction they were headed had they been asked right away. What is the chance, after all this time, of recalling something like that? I did ask the police why no such contact was made, and I was told that it is not their policy. They simply put out a request for public assistance and wait for a response." She also added, "I would like to say that I've been touched by the overwhelming support from my family, friends, and even complete strangers. Your love and compassion go a long way in helping me to cope and to stay positive right now." Poor Deborah. She added that many people had asked her about a trust fund, and she was very touched by that, but she was not comfortable with that idea. She did want to discuss it with her family, and she also said that she was so sorry if she appeared to be rambling, but that her hands were trembling as she was typing, and that it was hard for her to keep her thoughts straight. That's such a picture of how stressful and heartbreaking this would be for a mother or for any loved one. At the end of her message, Deborah signed off, saying, "Please stay strong, Nadia. We are all searching for you. Love, Mom." Police also reported that there were only 10 calls placed and received on Nadia's phone between November 21st and March 9th, and that seemed odd for a college-age student. But as I said, texting had become a lot more popular. It was just something that Mark found out at the time, and that may have been significant as they collected more and more evidence. Could they have been deleted from her phone? Not sure, just another note to make. Mark posted this on Facebook. "In this day and age, I will not accept the answers that she vanished from thin air. More than a week later, I can tell you that Carleton University needs to increase their CCTV budget. When wandering around, I saw minimal camera presence. Cameras are not meant to be in secret locations. They need to be right there as you walk in the lobby, get off the elevator, leave the front doors, and so on. I just have so many questions about so many things but don't know who to ask. The girls living with her, friends, boyfriends, teachers, cab drivers, bartenders, chefs, police. I could go on. The only point I'm making is that more than 9 days later, I'm not sure what information is out there to piece together a timeline. To me, that is very important. Not as important as the electronic tools they have, such as being able to read locks and cameras that I saw in the tunnels. Anything at this point will help. That is why genuine information and people are important. So you see, at this point, a week had gone by. It had also been reported that a woman was attacked on campus back in September, yet no changes were made to the CCTV system. Police were still talking to Nadia's friends, and remember I said that it wasn't entirely true that nothing like this had happened before. Well, you're about to find out why I said that. Police got in touch with a friend of Nadia's named Pascal Jensen. Pascal explained that at one point the two were very close. As a matter of fact, a mutual friend had introduced them to one another. At the time, Nadia was just beginning to express more of her true identity, and one aspect of Nadia that she revealed was in regard to her sexuality, which was not a phase, according to her. I'll let you watch it as I read what's on these papers that she's holding up. This was a trend back then. People used to hold up cards like this or posters with very deep and meaningful messages on them without saying a word. They usually just played some music. The first piece of paper reads, "My sexuality is not a phase." Remember back to what I said about Bittersweet Symphony and the evolution that we go through? Nadia was realizing things about herself. She was in a discovery era, and she was proud to embrace the new things that she was learning about herself. I told you sometimes people think it's a phase. Well, she says otherwise. Let's continue because this is a very powerful message. She writes, "My sexuality does not confuse me. My sexuality is not a cry for attention. My sexuality is not indicative of promiscuity. My sexuality is not idle curiosity. My sexuality is not a statement or rebellion. My sexuality is not a choice." Then she reveals, "I am bisexual," and then states, "My sexuality is a part of who I am. I do not need to pick a side." Her ultimate message is love the person, not the gender, ending with a paper that reads, "Bisexual Pride." Her friend Luke said that Nadia stood up for what she believed in, and it appears that he is correct. This is what Nadia believed about herself and what she stood for, loving the person. I try so hard to keep that in the forefront of my mind and be open to things that I'm not always familiar with, whether that's someone's ethnic background, their religion, or their sexuality. As Nadia put it, we're all humans. Pascal, who is studying contemporary dance at the School of Dance in Ottawa, was introduced to Nadia during the fall of their first semester, and she thought she was gorgeous. They had just both started coming out and had never been on a date with another woman before. They met at a cafe in town, and they were very nervous. They were new to this. But as soon as they sat down and talked, they connected right away, and they were there for like 7 hours until the cafe actually closed. They had great conversations. Pascal was impressed and knew Nadia was someone special, and they had the intention of spending more and more time together. They kept in touch through text since they were both very busy with school and would see each other in between studying and going to class. Pascal recalled coming over to Nadia's dorm, going to breakfast with her and her suite mates, and listening to music in her room. Nadia even gave her a tarot card reading. They were just having a lot of fun getting to know each other. Nadia read a few of her poems to Pascal, and Pascal described Nadia's poetry as beautiful and intricate. It was about life from her perspective. They were having such a great time together, and that is why it struck Pascal as odd when one night the pair planned to get together. It was back in November. Nadia told Pascal via text to meet at the dorm at 6, but when Pascal got there, Nadia was not answering her phone, nor was she coming to let Pascal in. Even after sending Nadia a few text messages saying, "Hey, I'm here, I'm outside your door, are you coming?" Nothing. Nadia just ghosted Pascal, and that was very out of character for her. It wasn't until 3 days later that Pascal finally got a text from Nadia that said, "I'm really sorry about the other night that I didn't get back to you. I was asleep when you texted, and I'm not feeling great." She explained that winter break was coming up. She had a lot of work to get done and had plans to go back home for Christmas. Then she said she wasn't even sure that she was going to come back to Carleton after break. Pascal just responded with, "I hope you get better soon, and if you need anything, I'll be there." Remember, by this time Nadia had already gone through 2 breakups, and she was just coming into who she was as a person. That's a lot to go through at once, so Nadia had kinda gotten off the grid before, in a sense. She was the type that wouldn't answer for a few days, even to people close to her, but this still seemed different. When Pascal found out that Nadia was missing, it was unreal. Nadia's picture was on TV. Just imagine that. The news stations were asking for the public's help. Pascal was just staring in disbelief. Of course, Pascal wanted to join in the search, looking everywhere around campus and beyond, just like everyone else who loved and cared about Nadia. 9 days after Nadia was last seen, a friend came forward with a tip, the first real lead in Nadia's case since she disappeared. Remember how her laptop was powered on? It was locked. It looked like she was writing an email. Well, she had written an email and sent it before locking her dorm room the last time on the night of March 9th. It was at 9:30 p.m. She emailed a friend telling them that she was going ice skating that night. The email read, "I am going to brave the elements and go out for a bit of a skate. I think I'll talk to you when I get back." Investigators talked to friends of hers. Luke had mentioned going with Nadia to that canal on previous occasions, so he was asked whether Nadia had ice skates, and he said yes. He gave a description: beige Nike skates with white fur on the ankles. Here's a picture of the same style skates. When investigators went looking in Nadia's dorm room for her skates, they were missing. That's when another friend, Jessica Brown, came forward and said she recalled seeing Nadia leaving the building with her winter coat around 11 p.m. on Sunday. Investigators confirmed that Nadia's winter coat that she usually wears is also missing from her dorm. So far, the items that are missing are her phone, her school ID, ice skates, her leather-bound journal, a black down-fill jacket, and a pair of high-soled suede boots with fur, coupled with the email that she sent at 9:30 saying she was going skating. Investigators begin to narrow their search to any area nearby where people go ice skating. When her family hears this, the first thing they think of is that she would not be going skating alone. So who was she meeting? Why was her journal missing, the same one that Luke had read without her permission? Something wasn't adding up. Plus, the most popular areas to skate, the Rideau Canal Skateway, were closed. For example, the season was closed March 5th, days before Nadia emailed that friend that she was going to brave the elements. The next location was Brewers Park, and that skating rink had also been closed due to inclement weather. There is a reason these skate areas close. I looked at the Rideau Skateway website today and found this big message. It says the skateway will not be open this winter because, despite all the efforts by their team, the latest ice tests show that the Rideau Canal Skateway remains unsafe for skating. This is usually open 24 hours a day, but if it's unsafe, no one should be on that ice. This really concerns investigators and, of course, Nadia's family. There's also an ice skating area on campus. It's an indoor rink, but there are only designated times for figure skating, and 9 p.m. on a Sunday was not one of them. I wondered what made these conditions unsafe. I'm not familiar, and the Skateway website explained that it's open to the public once the surface is at least 30 centimeters thick, so the ice has to be really thick and of good quality for that to happen. Their ice experts actually come out there. They need 10 to 14 days of consecutive cold weather once the layer of ice has been formed. Drilling team actually goes out there, and they drill down to get a core sample out of the ice. Look at this thing. They use this ice core, that's what they call it, to measure the thickness and check the ice quality. When their testing shows a sufficient thickness of 30 centimeters and good quality ice, then it's safe, and they do this daily. They also take into account all the weight and the pressure that's put on the ice from all of those people skating every single day. Not only do they monitor the thickness and the composition, but they also make sure there's not too much weight on the surface of the ice. The weight of the crowds and snow, the snow removal equipment, it all must be dispersed for the ice to remain safe. The ice inspection team monitors the vertical movement of the ice. If the ice sinks, it means there's too much weight on it. So, all of this was taken into consideration at the time Nadia told a friend she was going skating because she shouldn't have. There had been a bad snowstorm, and snowfall is bad for ice. Who would have known? I had no idea. When snow accumulates over the ice surface, it forms this insulating blanket, and it eats away at the surface of the ice. The weight of that snow also depresses the surface. That's why, after a snowfall, the maintenance crew is quick to get to work, get the snow blowers out and the snow plows, and get that snow off the surface and check for cracks. This all sounds scary and dangerous. So, investigators start to think an accident could have occurred, and Nadia may have fallen into the frozen river and been trapped underneath the ice. This is horrifying. The weather doesn't become warmer until around mid-April. That's when the ice melts and the river begins to flow freely again. It's frightening to think that this may be the most likely scenario here, but it's hard for people who know her to believe that Nadia would kind of do something this stupid. She was intelligent. She would have checked the conditions. She would have made sure it was open, and she would have never entered if it wasn't safe. Plus, they really don't think she would go alone regardless. And was it her that wrote that email? Was she meeting someone? There were just so many questions. At this point, there were about 10,000 people in that Facebook group dedicated to finding Nadia, plus a $50,000 reward was in place for any information leading to her whereabouts. Mohammed told the media, quote, "Just tell me where my daughter is alive, and $50,000 of my money is yours, no questions asked," end quote. He was breaking down in tears saying this. There were a lot of theories, but as investigators were digging deeper into Nadia's laptop, which was pretty much the only thing they really had to guide them, there were some concerning things discovered. Investigators started to put together a theory of their own, one that Nadia's loved ones were not happy about. Here's what they found. Nadia didn't just have a physical diary, but she also kept a video diary. She would post them on YouTube under a channel called Camera Shy 89. The videos had all been removed from the channel on March 8th, a day before Nadia went missing, but the channel was still up. Investigators were putting all of this forensic evidence together and connecting the dots here. The videos were saved on her laptop, so investigators began to watch them. In each one, Nadia is blindfolded. He says, "What's better than a video closet montage?" You can see it here on the screen. What is better than a video closet montage? It seemed like posting these videos was a release for Nadia, because there were more serious ones like this one, where she explains a very emotional situation that she went through that year. Here's that part now. "So I couldn't choose whether to keep the child or not, keep the child or go through it. Dependency, if that was hard to hear," Nadia said. While having sex with a guy that she was dating at the time, the condom broke. She took the morning after pill, but it failed. She was still pregnant. That's when she had a chance to realize that she didn't know what she wanted. But before she could make a decision of her own, she experienced a miscarriage, and now she was no longer in control of the outcome. That can be very emotional. This pregnancy wasn't with her long-term boyfriend. As far as I read, it was the relationship after that one ended when she was in the midst of trying to get over that and move on. Her family explained that she was head over heels for this guy whose baby she was carrying, so it made matters worse when they broke up after the miscarriage. Investigators talked to Nadia's parents, and her mother reveals that Nadia had actually confided in her about this entire situation. She was way too scared to tell her father, though, and Nadia's mother was surprised and concerned when she heard about the pregnancy. She, of course, offered her support and reassurance. She knew that revealing the news to her father would only bring its own challenges, and Nadia wanted to carefully consider her options before involving him. Deborah explained that before Nadia could even begin to process her feelings and decide about the future of her pregnancy, she experienced that heartbreaking miscarriage. The loss of the pregnancy sent Nadia spiraling into a whirlwind of emotions. She felt a mix of sadness, grief, and confusion. Nadia's miscarriage brought about a profound sense of loss and left her feeling empty. She grappled with the complex emotions of losing a child that she had not yet fully decided whether to keep. Nadia seemed to have found solace in the unique outlet of her anonymous video diary. In the privacy of her own room, she could just don a blindfold and pour her heart out on camera. So though the diary started out cheerful and carefree, it slowly began showcasing Nadia admitting her challenges and expressing her innermost thoughts and emotions. The investigators wanted to know if Nadia had been exhibiting any odd symptoms or behavior when she visited her parents on winter break. Deborah, Mohammed, and Mark explained that when Nadia returned for the holidays, they couldn't help but notice a noticeable change in her personality. Unlike previous visits, Nadia seemed closed off. She was spending a lot of her time confined in her room, and this behavior was a stark contrast to her usually sociable nature. Curiosity piqued. Her family started to try to engage her in conversation, but Nadia remained distant and unresponsive. It was like there was a wall up between her and the outside world. Concerned, her parents and her brother wondered what was causing this change in their daughter and sister. Of course, Deborah, having a lot more information about what her daughter had just gone through, hoped that she would again confide in her. But instead, she told her mom that continuing to ask her what was wrong was making it worse, that she just wanted to be left alone. So, Deborah abided by her wishes and gave her some space. Mohammed had been planning a surprise for Nadia, and during that trip home, he decided it was the perfect time to reveal it. He wanted to show her how proud he and Deborah were of all her hard work and accomplishments. She was always taking the bus everywhere, so Mohammed took it upon himself to buy her a brand new vehicle. When he noticed how down she was, he thought, okay, this surprise is going to lift her spirits, because why wouldn't any 18-year-old be excited about getting their own car? So he carefully planned the surprise. He made her choose a vehicle he knew she would love, and on the day of the reveal, Mohammed parked the car outside of their house, put a big red bow on it, and he couldn't wait to see the look on her face when she saw her brand new car. As Nadia opened the front door, a mix of excitement and nervousness filled Mohammed's heart. He said, "Happy birthday." But to his surprise and disappointment, Nadia's reaction wasn't what he expected. While she seemed grateful, her eyes just showed a disinterest. Instead of rushing outside and taking the car for a drive, she just looked at him and said, "It's not my birthday." And it wasn't her birthday. It was in June. But Mohammed was like, "Well, yeah, I know it's an early birthday gift." He handed her the keys. She took them and said, "Thank you, Dad," gave him a big hug, but then she just turned around and went right back inside. He knew that something wasn't right. Mohammed was worried. He and Deborah discussed it, and he was so concerned that he thought they needed to do more about it. But Deborah said she already tried talking to Nadia. She said she was fine, but her dad didn't believe her. He thought something must have happened at school, and of course, we know he was right. She had just experienced 2 breakups, an unplanned pregnancy, and a miscarriage, among all the other normal stressors of being a new student experiencing this new place. Plus, we know she was also starting to come out as bisexual, going on dates with Pascal. It was a lot. Her video diary started to change. They were darker in nature. Even the lights were dimmed in the video she recorded after winter break. In these videos, she's much closer to the camera, almost whispering as though she doesn't want anyone around to hear her. This was a time when she was spending hours and hours in her dorm room all alone. She became a lot less social. She spoke about her struggles while away at college, the pressure of academic expectations, and the overwhelming feeling of being lost in a fast-paced world around her. "Let's listen," she said. "I can't even go to class. I'm going to lose this semester. And it seems like it would be easy, just start going to class and doing your work, but I can't." She said she can't function, she can't stand school, she can't even go to class, and she was going to lose this semester. She goes, "It seems like it would be easy just to start going to your classes and doing your work, but you can't." When her parents were shown these videos, it became very clear that Nadia was struggling to have perfect grades. She had been an overachiever her whole life, striving to go to law school, which didn't leave much room for any mistakes. And we know that she even told Pascal she wasn't sure she wanted to come back for the 2nd semester. Pascal told investigators that they did correspond via Facebook over break and then into the new year. Pascal had asked Nadia how her Christmas break went, and she said it was okay. But then Pascal asked if she could see her that night, and Nadia said, "I can't, I'm too busy." So Pascal said, "Hey, you want to get some coffee tomorrow?" And Nadia said, "I'm sorry, I can't. I have too much work." Pascal said it really didn't seem like Nadia wanted to meet up, so their relationship did not progress after that. It became clear that Nadia either wasn't interested in making excuses, or that she just really didn't have any free time. Pascal says she did end up seeing Nadia once again before she disappeared. It was about a month before March 9th, late in February, and there was a party at a frat house. Friends told Pascal that Nadia would be going, and they did end up running into each other. They had drinks together, had a really great time, and Nadia seemed so happy. It was the Nadia that Pascal had remembered. They sat next to each other, took this picture, they were talking and connecting, and then Nadia got up. Pascal thought, okay, she's leaving to go to the restroom, but surprisingly, Nadia never came back. She didn't even let anyone know she was leaving. No one knew where she went. They called her and texted her over and over again with no response. Pascal was worried. She kept texting things like, "Where are you? I'm worried, please call me." So after hearing all this, investigators are leaning towards Nadia leaving on her own. She had done this before, so maybe she just picked up and walked out, and then maybe she got caught in a snowstorm, or maybe she's long gone by now. Now that the investigation is in full swing, they request all of Nadia's academic records. They want to know how she was doing in her classes, and it turns out it wasn't good. Her grades had dropped, she was skipping class, and apparently, she had an appointment with a counselor on Monday, March 10th, that she never showed up to because she went missing. But then, a huge red flag. As they looked deeper into why Nadia was scheduled with this counselor, there was a report about an incident that occurred on campus involving Nadia back in November, about 4 months before all this. I couldn't believe this, and neither could a lot of other people. Nadia was reported to have been running down the hallways at school, into the cafeteria, a full cafeteria with students, yelling and waving a box cutter in the air, with the razor blade pushed out. She was screaming, "Somebody help me before I hurt myself," begging and begging, saying, "Please help me before I hurt myself." It really made me sad. She was just screaming and flailing around until she passed out right on the floor in front of her fellow students and concerned staff. Nadia's parents, who were financially responsible for her education there at Carleton, were never notified about this bizarre and terrifying event. They were livid. How could the school keep this from them? Remember I told you, when someone's 18, a lot changes. There were rules in place to protect a student's privacy. Once they're 18, they're adults, so their records are not released to parents without their consent, and the school has no duty to inform them of these types of things, which I understand, but is also shocking. I can see both sides of this. 18 is still so young. Instead, the school ordered Nadia to attend weekly meetings with an on-campus mental health counselor, and she followed through. Nadia wanted help. She was exhibiting signs of depression, and she could not sleep. She wanted so badly to get back to her normal self. This is also when Nadia's video diary became even darker. There was one of these videos made shortly after she began these meetings with a counselor, where she admits that she's actually thought about self-harm and even discussed it with her counselor. It seems as though that she wanted a sleep aid to help her get some rest, and it sounds like the doctor or this counselor was not at that point of giving that to her. Back to Nadia, not sleeping has terrible effects. Not sleeping can have really devastating effects on us. Sleep deprivation can cause a number of issues for your mental health and physical health, and the main symptom of sleep loss is extreme sleepiness during the day. That means in the hours we need to actually get things done, it makes it hard to focus. There are other symptoms like depressed mood, poor memory, concentration issues, increased irritability, anxiety, impaired thinking, and so many more, including chronic health problems. Not sleeping can make you feel like you're going crazy and you're living in a haze. Sleeping, just like eating and drinking and breathing, is a basic human necessity. Hormones like the stress hormone cortisol, for example, can have higher levels, and that can affect your sleep. So many people also suffer from seasonal depression during the winter. I wanted to point out that Nadia actually talks about how snowy it is in one of her videos. She even positioned the camera so her viewers could see out the window at all the snow. It makes it even more dreary, causing many people not to be able to function as usual, and it sounds like Nadia falls into that group of people. Teens between 13 and 18 years old need about 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night. Nadia wanted medication to help her sleep. There are definitely things people can try. The first is usually not medication. It's sleep habits getting better, like winding down, not eating a big meal before bed, not being on your phone. We've probably heard of a lot of these, or even using sleep sounds, for example. After hearing about all this and the incident with the razor blade, as well as watching Nadia talk about self-harm in her videos, investigators theorize that she may have taken her own life. That is not something that any parent wants to hear, and Nadia's parents don't accept it. Deborah said that Nadia was sent to college as a well-adjusted shining star. She was happy and confident, and she loved her life. Nadia even had a note stuck to her poster board in her dorm room that said, "Don't forget to love your life," and it was written in her handwriting. Sure, she had things occur over the first semester that brought her mood down, and yes, she was in an argument with Luke, and she was seeing a counselor, and maybe she thought about self-harm. But her family just couldn't imagine that that is what was happening here. But there were parts of her videos like this one where she explained, if you admit you've been thinking about self-harm, they're like, well, what methods have you been thinking of? She says, oh, I don't know. All of them. Any of them. Whatever would work. Any of them. Whatever would work for me. That's terrifying, and I think it would be for her family. And who was she referring to? Who would she be admitting this to that would ask her what methods she had thought about? Was this her counselor, or was it someone else? Because aren't medical professionals supposed to report that if you're thinking about committing self-harm? There were a lot of questions. I'm sure you know that in many cases, as soon as self-harm is mentioned as a possible reason that someone is missing, opinions shift. Many times, people see it as a cop-out or think they're cowardly, and it's taken less seriously than, let's say, a kidnapping or a murder would be. And that was what was happening right now in Nadia's case. Mark and his father were even taunted. They were on campus one afternoon during their painstaking search for Nadia, and Mark took to Facebook to express his anger and disappointment. On March 18th, he posted, "By the way, if anyone knows those two drunks that yelled out to my father, 'There's Nadia,' and fell into the snowbank, tell them to call me or just show a little more respect for themselves." Wow, it's cruel. People can be cruel. Mark went on to say that he hopes all of this can bring more awareness all around Carleton. My papa hit the streets, malls, etc. but he couldn't be there because he kept wishing to see her. Carlton is like a mini city, and he has not been seen handing out flyers as much as people in the market. People know who to look for, but there are still no answers. I was being interviewed by the news, chatting with this cameraman, and a little punk asked me for a cigarette. I was simply frustrated that this boy would interrupt a man who's working to help find her, but I stated no. Normally, there would have been another comment, but I'm far too positive to waste energy. I need that for my sister, he said. Another thing he revealed was that there's so much information that I've gathered in the last 48 hours, and I just don't understand why it's taking authorities so long to take this serious. I won't get into details out of respect for my sister in the process of this investigation, but I'm furious with the way things are being handled and the comments made by authorities that are supposed to protect people at the school. It's disgusting and insensitive. That being said, the people that care should start asking all the questions they can, because without questions, there are no answers. He goes on, it took until the 12th to be reported to the police, yet her music was on loud, and security had to open her door in the morning. This was normal to listen to music in her room, but if she was seen leaving with the same loud music playing, why did that not set off some alarm bells to security and her roommates, considering she was not in her room? Why does it take so long to comb through the video footage on campus? Why does Luke feel that it's a grieving process instead of taking a stand and doing something? Why has he not contacted me? Is he in this group? If he doesn't want to comment to the news about her journal, what is even in it? Why doesn't he tell me even though I know what's in it? According to the head of the Ottawa Missing Persons Unit, Sergeant Linegar, I have so many more questions but no answers. You can tell just how frustrated Mark was. Families don't always get the information either, and authorities deal with so much of this that they can come off as insensitive. Word got out that the detectives theorized that Nadia may have been contemplating taking her own life. Perhaps she went somewhere to do it. There were many web sleuths in that Facebook group, which was now at 15,000 members, all trying to help or stay up to date on Nadia's case. So it would seem Nadia had every intention to live until she was old and gray, making a comment like that. And that's what the poster wanted to share, something positive. That song's lyrics are also very deep, with the chorus saying, "I said maybe you're gonna be the one that saves me." We know Nadia was reaching out for help again. Art imitates life, and it makes sense that you would be drawn to the song like she was to Bittersweet Symphony, being a poet herself. Reading through the posts on Facebook, somebody said the fact her phone was with her and didn't shut off until March 10th meant that she probably didn't go skating and fall into water because her phone would have instantly shut off. And that's a good point. I'm sure the detectives were taking all of this into account. But another poster and friend told the group they remembered Nadia talking about what happens to your Facebook account after you die, and that this was just 2 days before she left. No one knew what to believe. Nadia's mom, Deborah, also posted in the Facebook group, and she said, "Much is being said about the response by the Ottawa police. I've been asked many times how I feel about their response, and it's a difficult question to answer. Keep in mind as you read this, I am her mother, and as such, my judgment is clouded and biased. I just needed to say that first in order to keep things in the proper context. Of course, as her mother, I would have expected more from the police. I would try to keep only to the facts and keep my emotions from surfacing." The first thing that struck me as very strange was when we visited Nadia's room. Police had already searched the room, and I was told they completed an inventory of everything in it. Her laptop was sitting open on her desk. It had not been shut down and had been locked. You could see from the faded screen that she'd been using her email just before it was locked. I could not understand why police had not already seized the computer because of that. We would have to wait another week before finding out about the email she had sent. Nadia's aunt was also posting a lot and responding to many theories. She didn't think Nadia really went skating at all. Maybe it was to throw everyone off. Meanwhile, the detectives found out that Nadia finally did get that medication she wanted. She was actually prescribed 2 medications, one for insomnia and the other for depression. But instead of helping her, it seemed as though Nadia became even more antisocial and spent more and more time holed up in her room alone. There was something else, something even more concerning. As detectives did their forensic analysis on Nadia's laptop, they pulled up all the websites that she had been visiting, and one stood out. It was called Alt Suicide Holiday. This was sort of like a Reddit-type forum that was created to talk about the relationship between holiday seasons and self-harm thoughts. But eventually, over the years, this forum evolved into a place where anyone could express their thoughts and feelings about taking their lives and find support to get through it. A place for like-minded people to connect. The site was known by the acronym ASCH and eventually just became known as ASCH. So, Nadia had ventured onto that site while Googling things about her thoughts. Many of the people that go on ASH are not actually suffering from thoughts of death and ending their life. Many participants are there to post positive messages and provide psychological support. But this site was also well known for being a negative place for people who are hurting the way that Nadia was, because it can open the door to trolls. It's not moderated, anything goes in there, and there are a lot of really dark conversations, including forums that discuss the best ways to end it all. Detectives didn't think that this was a good sign. They were able to pull up Nadia's profile, sign into the account, and explore the things that she was talking about. Eventually, they found messages that she exchanged with another poster on the site. This poster's username was Cami D, who also went by Falcon Girl, or just Cami. The conversation started on ASH, but then Nadia and Cami moved their conversations to MSN Messenger because it was private. That way, they could connect on a deeper level and share their stories. Detectives scrolled through weeks and weeks of messages between the two of them. They initially had normal exchanges, talking about life. Cami said she was from Minnesota and was 25 years old. She had been suffering from depression for 12 years, and she had already tried meds, therapy, yoga, and prayer, but nothing helped. Cami then asked Nadia about her story, so she told her what we already know. Nadia did lie about her age. She told Cami she was 21. But it didn't matter how old she was, because she was ready to end it. She had had enough of this life. She was tired and wasn't doing well. And it was a big relief for Nadia to be able to talk to someone who understood what she was going through. The conversations, of course, went on into many different topics, and there were moments when Nadia would ask questions. For example, she wondered what it was like to die. She asked her new friend Cami this question less than a week before she went missing. Cami's response was that she thought it would probably feel nice. They both talked about how depressed they felt and delved into deep, morbid conversations, including the best methods. Could this have been who Nadia had been referring to in her video diary when she said that they ask you how you do it and if you've thought of the different ways? It seems like Cami could be the person she was talking about. Cami was an emergency ward nurse, so she was very knowledgeable about the body. She expressed her own opinions on the best ways that would be quick and effective, since the last thing they wanted was for it to fail. She told Nadia she knew what does and doesn't work. It made me sad reading these things because I can only imagine how heartbreaking it would be for Nadia's family and her close friends. They had no idea she was hurting like this. Had they known, they said they would have done something. But it was this next part that confirmed to detectives that Nadia had a plan, and it looked as though she had carried it out. Further down in the conversations, Cami and Nadia seemed to get to a point where they both went from merely thinking about this to having a plan. Cami suggested hanging, saying that with her knowledge and expertise, it was the best way to go. You just had to make sure you had the right type of rope, and it had to be able to hold their weight. But the main thing was getting the knot or the noose in the right place. They made a pact that they would plan to do it together on the same day. Cami said that she already had all her supplies and that she would wait on Nadia. Nadia asked Cami if she was scared, and Cami said no, not at all. Nadia then proceeded to ask what type of rope she needed. Cami said if she went to any home improvement store, she could pick up some yellow nylon rope. The week Nadia went missing, they had another exchange. Nadia asked Cami how she was doing, and she said, "You know what? Not good, hon. Still thinking about taking my life. Pretty bad." She asked Nadia how she was doing, and Nadia said the same. Cami then asked Nadia if she had a webcam so they could be together when they did it, that they would make a pact and do it at the same time, so it wouldn't be as scary, and so they wouldn't be alone. Cami would be there for support, and also to make sure they had their ropes in the right place. Nadia thanked Cami, and Cami responded, "You're welcome, hon." They decided to make a code word to talk about their plans. They referred to it as catching the bus. In one message, Nadia asked Cami, "So when are you going to catch the bus?" Cami replied, "I would like to do it soon." Nadia responded that she was planning to attempt it that Sunday, March 9th. Cami said, "Wow, okay. Well, are you going to use the rope method?" That was when Nadia hesitated. She wasn't showing much interest in the idea of hanging. but she was open to talking to Cami about her feelings and making a plan to do what they were going to do on the same day. However, Nadia expressed her intention to make it look like an accident if she ever went through with it. She said she was going to jump. She talked about how she would put on her ice skates and jump off a bridge over the Rideau River. She knew there was a portion in the river that had a break in it, and her skates would break it even more, carrying her down and trapping her under the ice. If she didn't drown, she was hoping that she would die of hypothermia. She wanted it to look as though she was skating and had an accident. Nadia said that the river was really rough once you got past the ice, so it should carry her underneath quickly. There wouldn't be a chance for her to come up for air. Cami told her that she would carry out her own plan the very next day, on Monday, March 10th. Cami wished that she could be there with Nadia, but she said, "If I can't die with you, I will." Shortly after, Nadia said, "We are together in this," and Cami replied, "Yes, I promise." Both girls thanked one another and expressed how glad they were that they could be honest with someone. That was it. The detectives were convinced that Nadia took her own life. They went back out and searched that area of the river, but it was still frozen over. Now they had an additional concern though. All the way in Canada, they were worried about the young woman in the States who was planning on catching the bus, as they were saying. On March 10th, they decided to do some digging so they could alert the Minnesota authorities and have them check on Cami, possibly solving another case if Cami had already died or if she was missing. The Ottawa police traced Cami's profile to an email address, falcongirl507. With that information, they were able to trace an IP address to Faribault in Rice County, Minnesota. Even if they couldn't find Nadia, maybe they could find Cami, and maybe she knew more than what was online if she was still alive. This case was getting even more unbelievable and confusing, so just wait. Officers in the Minnesota area showed up at the address to do a welfare check. I have to commend the Ottawa Police Department for their efforts in locating this home and connecting with Minnesota authorities to go there and check on Cami. When they knocked on the door, an older man in his late 40s or early 50s answered. When police asked his name, he said, "Hi, I'm William Melcher Dinkle." The police explained what was going on and the reason they believed there was someone in danger at this house by the name of Cami, a 25-year-old nurse. They asked if he had any knowledge of the email address falcongirl507, and he said no, he had no idea what they were talking about. He explained, "I do live here with my wife and my 2 teenage daughters." He mentioned that both he and his wife were actually nurses. William told the police his teenage daughters had knowledge of medical procedures, and they would certainly be aware of methods of catching the bus. I'm probably going to forever use that phrase in reference to self-harm now, but William thought that maybe one of his girls had been communicating on these forums under the name Cami D. However, no one by that name lived there. His wife and daughters were perfectly fine. However, didn't Nadia's family think she was okay? Didn't she tell her mom she was perfectly fine too? William told the officers that he was thankful they alerted him and that he would speak with his daughters and his wife and would get them counseling if need be. Well, at least there's that. Maybe the officers had just saved one of his daughters' lives. They hoped so, but they were also at a dead end with Nadia's case. All they could do was continue searching. They were out there along the banks of that river, and campus security was combing all the buildings and tunnels on campus. They were even flying airplanes overhead, conducting aerial searches. An empty prescription bottle was found in Nadia's dorm room. However, it was about to come up for refilling by the date that Nadia went missing. So unless she had saved them up and took them all at once, they didn't think they were connected. Other reports were found. There were 2 incidents that year where Nadia had passed out and needed medical attention. She was taken to a hospital, but her parents never knew. They had no idea this was going on. Mohammed did several interviews with newspapers and was definitely surprised about what had been going on in his daughter's life over the last 8 months. He didn't believe she would ever harm herself. He thought that she'd probably gone for a walk, went skating, and passed out in the snow, but it was because she was probably overtaken by that medication she was on. He also thinks she might have been taken, but the police don't believe that's a very likely scenario. By the 25th of March, the police had decided to stop all searches for Nadia. News was out that she may have been talking on MSN Messenger with someone in the States about self-harm on the day of March 9th. One article in the Ottawa Citizen included a very in-depth interview with Mohammed, where he revealed the content of those messages, which I've already shared with you. Something you didn't hear was that these conversations with Cami online started after Nadia got angry that she wasn't able to move out of the dorm rooms and into an apartment with friends. She also told Cami that if she jumped, she would bring her school ID and her cell phone so that she could be easily identified, sparing her family the pain of not knowing what happened to her. But that's the thing, Nadia still hadn't been found. Muhammad said that until she was, he wouldn't give up hope. He said she would not be able to harm herself if she were sober, but he worried about her being on medication. He still thought that she could run away because she wasn't in a good mindset. He went on to say, if somebody knew these little things were happening in her life, why wouldn't they say, listen, your daughter's having difficulty, maybe you should sit down and talk with her or get some help. He said he didn't know that she almost gave up. If I would have known that during winter break, he said, there's no way I would have let her go back. And I'm just going to tell you, as a parent, I kept thinking, Nadia was so worried that she was going to, as she put it, lose the whole semester. She didn't want to upset her family. If any of you are out there right now in a position similar to what Nadia was going through, I want to tell you, and I hope this is helping, they would rather lose the money than you. I can tell you that Muhammad said he would keep looking for her, no matter how long it took, and then he read a letter written by his wife. This man could hardly keep it together. The letter said, to every parent out there, I only have one piece of advice. Hug your children every chance you get. Make sure you tell them how much you love them and how special they are. You never know what tomorrow will bring. And that goes for everyone in your life. I believe that too. Now, one point I was thinking, and you might be thinking this too, was why weren't there any suspects? That just crossed my mind because I do so many of these cases. But then I realized they hadn't found any evidence of foul play, a crime scene, or a body. So this wasn't a homicide investigation, it was a missing persons case. So then I understood why there weren't necessarily anyone to be interrogated or interviewed. I mean, all the family members and friends were interviewed, but there were no suspects because they didn't know what happened. Muhammad was a butcher at Costco, and he would make that drive from his city of Brampton all the way to Ottawa every day, getting to that canal and looking for Nadia. It would take him 3.5 hours to go down one side of it, and then he would do it again, going back. The snow was starting to melt, and the river had started to thaw. So, you know, he wasn't looking for Nadia alive. He had resigned himself to the fact that his daughter was most likely dead. He was now looking for a body, but he was still praying that she was still alive. He still wouldn't accept that Nadia jumped to her death. He said if she was found in that river, it wasn't because she jumped, it was because someone pushed her. He was really concerned about her being on medication, and he said that he wasn't even allowed to speak to the counselor because of confidentiality concerns. Deborah remembered the last conversation she had with her daughter. She said it was shorter than usual. They had a couple of what she referred to as meaningless conversations about trivial things, like the dog. She really tried to get Nadia to tell her what was wrong, but Nadia got upset. Deborah tried calling her on the weekend, but she just got her voicemail. She figured, you know, she's upset with me, I just need to give her some time. 1 month had passed since Nadia went missing. After 6 weeks, on April 20th, 2008, the Ottawa police got a phone call around 11:15 a.m. A person kayaking on the Rideau River, right behind St. Paul University, saw what they believed to be the body of a woman floating on the edge of the riverbank. Firefighters and police officers went and cordoned off that area. It was a section of Brentwood Park near Clegg Street. This is the approximate location right here. They were there around noon. Water rescue went into the river and retrieved a body. They covered it with a large yellow tarp and reported preliminarily that the cause of death was drowning. There were no signs of foul play or trauma on her body, and it was most likely that she had been trapped under the ice all of those weeks. They thought this was Nadia because the woman was wearing a pair of ice skates. This was the worst news. There were nearly 20,000 people in that Facebook group when they reported that a body had been found. No one wanted to believe it was her. But this case isn't over. There's a reason I wanted to cover it, and that reason has not been uncovered yet. Even though a body was found, just wait, because it's even more shocking than you can possibly imagine. Nadia's family gets the call that they're dreading the most. It's bittersweet. On one hand, they want so badly to find Nadia, but not this way. As you can possibly imagine, it was absolutely devastating to everyone. Mark couldn't fathom that his little sister was found that way, just floating lifelessly in the river. Muhammad and Deborah didn't want to believe it. They were so broken. Pascal got a call from a friend informing her of what happened, and she just lost it, falling to the ground crying. This was not the outcome that anyone wanted. but it was one they were preparing for as well. Back in early April, Deborah posted this in the Facebook group. "I've already come to the realization that the most likely case is that Nadia took her own life. It haunts me every moment of my life. In September, I sent a shining star to Ottawa. She was well-adjusted, happy, and confident, and loved life. Something went terribly wrong in Ottawa, and it kills me that I didn't know and couldn't do anything. Does anyone truly believe I don't already realize the most likely outcome here? But still, I hope that somehow someone picked her up, that will find her and will help her heal, and she can be happy again. Until a body is found, I will continue to hope. I need hope. It's all I have right now." And now all of that hope was gone. Now it was acceptance and grief. There were nasty messages in that Facebook group, ones that are so heartless I can't comprehend how anyone can think them, let alone write them and let family and loved ones see them. A family friend, Mark Bennett, who had known Nadia almost her whole life, responded to one of these heartless remarks. It was from a stranger who never met Nadia. He said, "You may have your own opinions, but you also stated that we shouldn't have sympathy for her either. As far as I'm concerned, this was inappropriate. I have a great deal of sympathy for a girl that I love very much, and sorrow for the fact I was unaware of her suffering. Also, you may not realize this, but she did seek help for her troubles. The school doctor prescribed a medication that can cause severe mood swings and even intensify depression. How can you blame Nadia when you have no idea what her mental state was at the time? I assure you this isn't typical of her normal behavior." 2 days after Nadia was found, her father had to go identify her body. That would have been the hardest thing for a father to do. An autopsy would later confirm that the body found was Nadia Kajuji. She was covered in scrapes and bruises, but the medical examiner determined that it was probably from the ice and her body floating down the river. There were no signs of foul play, and the cause of death was ruled as hypothermia. That's really tough to come to terms with. On April 26th, Nadia's loved ones said their last goodbyes at a funeral in her hometown of Brampton, Ontario. Pascal was very angry at Nadia for not reaching out and not admitting what she was going through, but Nadia was reaching out. Remember, she found Kami D. Falcon Girl, the nurse who was her confidant, someone she wasn't ashamed to admit all of these things to tell her deepest, darkest secrets. But there was something Nadia didn't know, something so sinister it makes me sick and angry, and it's even hard for me to relay to all of you. While everyone is grieving Nadia's loss, trying to come to terms with her decision and laying her to rest, trying to move forward in life, someone was out there piecing something together. Her name is Celia Blair. She's a 60-year-old anti-self-harm advocate and activist from a small town called Maiden Bradley on a horse ranch all the way in England. She was about to solve Nadia's case, and she didn't even know it. 3 years earlier, Celia found herself delving into the depths of the internet in the years after her parents died. Celia, who was a retired teacher and horse lover, took to the internet to find solace from others dealing with the same things, and that led her to the self-harm-related forums. Her goal was to offer support for anyone thinking about it and guidance to get through their hardships so they wouldn't go through with it. She was successful time and time again, so she made it her mission. She was a protector by nature, a loving woman who wanted to spread awareness and love. She suffered from depression in the past and used her experience to help others, especially young people. Celia began chatting online in the Ash forum, the same forum Nadia had been in. Celia connected with a 17-year-old girl from South Africa, let's call her Sophia. Celia began asking Sophia about her life, why she was depressed, and whether she was seeing a doctor or a therapist. The normal questions and offering help continued as they began talking on a regular basis. Eventually, Sophia decided she didn't want to go through with taking her life. She revealed that she was also talking to another woman whom she initially thought wanted to help her like Celia was, but those conversations were very different. This other woman was named Lee Dow. Once Sophia realized she didn't want to go through with it, it dawned on her that this Lee Dow girl was actually saying things to push Sophia over the edge. Celia wanted to know more. Sophia explained that Lee Dow was an emergency room nurse from Minnesota who knew a lot about medicine and the body. She had also been depressed for most of her life and was at the point where she was ready to go. Lee said she wanted to help Sophia. They were a team, friends. Over time, they shared a lot with one another, and eventually Lee offered Sophia advice on the best method, hanging. She just needed the right type of rope. Does this sound familiar? Because it gave me the chills. Celia was, of course, concerned. The more information Sophia provided, the more upset Celia became. Lee Dow had apparently told Sophia they could have a pact and die together on webcam. Celia asked to see these messages. As someone with a lot of life experience, she wanted to examine them for herself, and she was shocked. Message after message, Lee was almost manipulating this poor teenager, a teenager in a very vulnerable position, into taking her own life. It wasn't support, it was coaxing. Lee said things like, "If you want, I can watch you do it, and I can show you how, and then of course I'll take my life afterward." Lee explained it would be quick. It would only take 10 to 15 seconds. Little Sophia asked, "Will it hurt?" And Lee assured her it would be painless. She said, "Trust me." And the sad thing is, Sophia had trusted her, so much so that she planned to take her life the same day that Celia was able to convince her not to. Celia was worried about other users on the site, so she started to go to as many chats as possible and report Lee if she saw her username anywhere. Then she posted a warning all over the forum. She would contact anyone who had been chatting with Lee in public and warn them that she was very dangerous. It turns out, Celia found all kinds of messages between Lee Dow and other users in all the chats. Lee said she was going to make a pact with them, except Lee never went through with it, because, obviously, she was still chatting. As Celia got more and more determined to warn others, that's when users started coming forward with stories of their own. Each one of them was the same. Celia believes that Lee Dow is an online predator preying on vulnerable people with very cruel intentions. Lee wants people to die in front of her on camera. It's clear the motive is to watch them suffer. Celia becomes a detective of sorts. She wants to get to the bottom of who this person is. Her mission changes from helping people one by one to exposing this predator and helping many people who may fall victim to this death scheme. One of the users that was corresponding with Lee connected with Celia. Her name was Kat Lowe. Kat explained she was in a very vulnerable state of mind when she began talking to Lee Dow. Kat is a mother of two who had hit rock bottom, and she wanted to end it. Lee promised to be there for her until the end. They had a pact. But then Kat explained she felt like she could never get away from Lee. Anytime she turned on her computer, Lee was there asking, "When are you gonna do it? When are you gonna do it?" Very persistent. Once Celia and Kat began chatting about Lee Dow, they decided to come up with a plan. They would coax Lee to chat over email instead of the forum. That way they could have even more personal conversations. Their end goal was to try to get Lee to send a picture of herself to Kat. Now it was scamming the scammer. Kat was trying to appeal to Lee, asking her for advice on how to end her life. Of course, Lee was more than happy to give her all the best tips and tricks. And it's sick. Lee agrees and emails Kat. The email address Lee used was none other than FalconGirl507. Wow, unbelievable. That's the same email address that was connected to Kami D. Do you see what's happened here? Just wait. As the two exchanged messages, Kat told Lee that she was so thankful that Lee was helping her. Kat needed to know what kind of rope to use, how to tie it right, how to position it, knowing Lee would take the bait. Over time, Lee agreed to help Kat through webcam. They were going to turn on their cameras, and Lee was going to walk Kat through everything step by step. When the camera turned on, Kat was waiting with her phone to snap a picture of Lee. Right when Lee switched on her camera, bam! Kat pushed the camera button, but to her surprise, this is the picture she snapped. It was a man, not a woman. Lee Dow was not only a predator, they were catfishing. She was a he, and he definitely didn't look 25 years old. This was shocking. This revelation shattered any preconceived notions that she had about the perpetrator's identity. However, the man's misjudgment didn't end there. He inadvertently exposed himself further with this critical error. He used his real name in the email header. With this crucial piece of information, Celia unraveled the mystery and discovered that the mastermind behind this evil scheme was William Melcher Dinkle. You may remember that name. How can you forget it? Remember the concerned father who came to the door when Kami D's IP address was traced, saying it was most likely one of his teenage daughters responsible for corresponding with Nadia in the Ash forum. He told police that he would be making sure to speak with them and get them the therapy they needed. Liar. Once Celia had obtained the identity of the individual responsible for orchestrating these online pacts with multiple people, trying to get them to take their lives, she promptly reported back to law enforcement in Britain. Having gathered substantial evidence, she was optimistic that they were going to take this case seriously. However, much to her disappointment, the law enforcement officers seemed hesitant to pursue this matter any further. Celia even tried to go to the FBI, but they never followed up with her. She was determined. She got back to work, gathering even more information, and while conducting her investigation into William Melcher Dinkle and his involvement in this predatory behavior online, she stumbled upon a heart-wrenching story involving a grieving mother named Elaine Drybo. Elaine's 32-year-old son, Mark, who worked in IT, had been living back at home after he started battling Epstein-Barr syndrome. He had died a couple of years earlier. His physical ailments had taken a toll on his mental health. This virus leads to mono, it weakens your immune system, causes fatigue, rashes, and overall, it's very unpleasant. As Mark's condition deteriorated, he came to a point where he was seeking help in the Ash Forum. He talked about how much pain he was in, how depressed he was, and he was looking for support. While he found Lee Dow, who was unfortunately not there to help, but to convince him to take his life by hanging. Unlike some of Lee Dow's, or I should say William's, other victims, Mark followed through with every step that William gave him, convinced that he was speaking with Lee Dow, a nurse who cared that they were in this together. William told Mark that he would be there till the end, on webcam of course, while still posing as Lee. William even told Mark that he had already watched someone go, and according to him, it was very peaceful. He was pleased that he could make this guy's last moments special for him. But Mark pushed back. He said he wasn't sure he wanted to die. He told Lee that even though it's not a life that he feels he's living, he can manage for now, just one day at a time. But Lee seemed disappointed, not at all supportive that Mark wanted to spare himself, instead pressing him to end it. On July 27, 2005, Mark's sister came home to a note on a table that said, "Don't go upstairs." But she did, and tragically she found her brother deceased, hanging from a rope tied to his door. He followed Lee Dow's instructions to the letter. After Mark's death, his family found all of his online activity, including his conversations with Lee Dow. Upon learning that Mark Drybo had taken his own life at Lee Dow's urging, Celia Blay was compelled to do everything she could to lock this predator up. Since she wasn't getting any help from law enforcement in England, Celia sent all of her research to the Minnesota Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force in 2008. Since she knew through her diligent research that William lived in the state of Minnesota, on March 25th, in the middle of Nadia's missing persons investigation, Sergeant William Hayter of St. Paul, Minnesota, who was in charge of exposing child exploitation via the internet, got Celia's email. He had never been contacted by anyone from another country, and the information he found in the email was pretty basic. It was about an online predator that was using chat rooms to convince people to take their lives. But Celia didn't stop there. As we know, she provided more information about Mark's case, and though skeptical, this piqued the sergeant's interest. The reason he took it seriously at this point was that the behavior he was seeing this predator exhibit fell into the Minnesota law against aiding death. In 2008, anyone who advises, encourages, or assists someone in taking their own life would be guilty of a felony. However, the sergeant had an issue. He had no idea who was writing these responses. Was it really William or someone else in his house? So the officer decided to go to William's house and question him. It was January 9, 2009, when Sergeant Hayter and two officers made a surprise visit to William Melcher Dinkle at his home. It had been nearly a year after Nadia's death on a dark, cold winter night. William met them at his front door at 6:00 p.m. for what the officers referred to as a knock and talk. They were hoping that they could get a statement from him. Sergeant Hayter could tell that William was nervous. He introduced himself and explained why they were there. They conducted an internet investigation, but William interrupted them before they could go further. He told the officers, "Come on, come inside, take a seat," and then added that he had a feeling he knew why they were at his house. It was because of the Ash Forum. William appeared to be average, a middle-aged man. He didn't look like some kind of evil monster. He was a family man with a quaint home, church-going, and very pleasant with the officers. So they went on to explain why they were there. They just confirmed it was William, not anyone else, that was in that forum. Sergeant Hayter wanted William to explain what he was doing there and what he was saying to people. William explained that yes, he was talking to people. He referred to himself as an advocate, an advisor to the troubled souls who sought help on these sites. He went on to explain that he liked to remain anonymous, and that's when he admitted to being Lee Dow, Falcon Girl, and Kami D. Wow. Sergeant Hayter wanted to know if William talked people out of taking their lives, and William said, "Oh yeah, I do, but sometimes you can't." Those were his words. The police questioned William regarding his involvement in counseling people to end their lives. In response, William clarified that as a nurse, He was fully aware that these individuals had already decided and were determined to carry out their actions, regardless of his advice or counseling. He emphasized that his role was not to persuade or encourage them, but to provide support and understanding during this difficult time. He was just an advisor they needed someone to talk to, and he was there for them. This man was really trying to downplay his role in all of this, but Sergeant Hayter saw the arrogance in him. He thought he was smarter than everybody else, that maybe the officers would just be like, "Okay, you were just helping people. That's fine, you're such a good person, we'll leave now." But that's not what happened. Instead, Sergeant Hayter confronted him directly. "Mr. Dinkle, you're a nurse. What were you thinking?" But the sergeant needed more details, so he asked William, "As a nurse, how did you feel about advising a stranger about methods of ending their life?" He was essentially playing God, but he started to admit that his role had evolved over time into something very sinister, an obsession. He wanted to know how many other people William had done this to. William said around 5 people that he knew had actually committed the act, which was incredibly terrifying. When Sergeant Hayter listened to everything, he basically said, "Wow, and you didn't do it, but they did." William replied, "Well, obviously." That's when Sergeant Hayter remarked, "Wow, that sounds very manipulative." He asked whether William had been involved in speaking with a woman in Ottawa who went through with it, and William admitted that he was fascinated with strangulation deaths. This was a lot to take in. During their conversation, William admitted that he was the one who sent tips to Mark Drybo and Nadia Kajuji. To their surprise, he admitted that he did it, and I think we all have the same question that Hayter did. Why? William's response was chilling. He said that it was for the thrill of the chase. Wow, that's sick. For 4 years, this man had come up with a system to get people to take their lives, using it again and again. The chase was hunting down vulnerable people, using his tactics to lure them, manipulate them, and coax them, all under the guise of a helpful professional nurse and friend who was hurting just like they were. When in reality, it was alleged that William had a sexual fantasy involving asphyxia, and his goal was to get off by watching these individuals take their last breath. He admitted that he asked people to turn on their webcams so he could watch them. But Sergeant Hayter wanted William to confess what he had done to his wife, who happened to be home during this interview. The strategy was to get William into a more vulnerable position so that Hayter and his detectives believed that disclosing this to his wife would weaken some of the support he may be getting from his family. Hayter was concerned that if his family stuck up for him and felt sorry for him, it would make it more difficult for them to address all these issues and get him to confess, but more so to prosecute his wrongdoing. They planned to take this to court, and they wanted it to be successful. So William did what the officers directed. He called his wife to his side and said that these officers believed he was responsible for 2 people taking their lives. She was in complete shock. They were both nurses whose careers revolved around helping people. It didn't make sense that he would do something so inhuman. She had no idea what he had been up to, and I can imagine how confusing that would be for a partner. Though you've promised to stand by someone for life, it was a nightmare. After conducting the interview with William, Sergeant Hayter concluded they just didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest. However, William voluntarily handed over his computer, and they were hoping that since they came there unannounced, he wouldn't have had time to delete anything. They believed there would be enough incriminating proof on that computer to establish his involvement in the deaths of Mark and Nadia. When they did a forensic analysis on William's computer, they found a multitude of photos of people hanging and others of deceased individuals with marks on their necks. It was very morbid. They also located an email sent to him from Nadia the night she left her dorm room to make her way to that bridge and jump. It read, "Hi Cammy, I just thought I'd write you a quick note before I go. I'm feeling at peace now, and it makes me feel better knowing that I won't die alone. Now I'm going through my computer files, deleting things I don't want people to find after I'm gone. I must say I'm feeling a lot better that I can talk to you. I'm glad things are going to end tonight. I'm feeling confident. I want to go now, but there are too many people about. My cell phone number is number. If you tried texting me on Monday and it doesn't go through, that means I jumped. The pain will be temporary, then it will be over. Thank you again, Nadia." Once the police questioned William about Mark and Nadia in the forums, he ran to the local hospital emergency room. According to those records, he complained that he had a self-harm fetish and was addicted to self-harm websites. He said he felt worthless and guilty. "It's hard for me to think that the last person Nadia spoke to was this evil monster, this manipulative, disgusting demon that sought to destroy her. She even thanked him. It broke my heart reading that. Plus, they discovered an email William sent to Mark with step-by-step tips, and he signed off as Hugs Lee, his alias. Nadia's family was heartbroken to learn that she was aided in her death by a 50-year-old American man. Muhammad read the chats between Kami D and his daughter and told the press, the way that he was playing with her mind, she was so gullible. Everything this man told her, she believed. It's not true when people say sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never harm you. Because I think most of us know how badly words can harm and how much destruction they can do. In light of the investigation into William, the Minnesota Board of Nursing took the necessary actions to suspend his license. The board's findings also revealed a lot of misconduct spanning several years. William's disciplinary actions were documented in a comprehensive report, 27 typewritten pages long, shedding light on numerous instances of abuse, negligence, and unacceptable behavior. When the media heard all of this, they were determined to get some answers. During interviews, when they tried to talk to William, he slammed doors in their faces and refused to speak, while the cameras just kept rolling. The microphones were out, but the reporters found themselves faced with a wall of silence. The man wouldn't talk. He was chatting a lot with his buddies on the forum about helping others end their lives, but he had nothing to say now. Detectives assigned to the investigation in Minnesota put in extensive effort, gathering evidence and building a strong case against William. After months, they were finally ready to present their findings to prosecutors. In February of 2010, they concluded their investigation and handed over their meticulously compiled case. Ottawa and the UK didn't feel like they had any way to bring charges, but Minnesota did. The charges against William were based on Minnesota's assisted self-harm statute, a rarely invoked legislation. This law imposes severe penalties for individuals who aid or encourage someone to take their own life. Under the statute, those found guilty could face imprisonment of up to 15 years and fines up to $30,000. Nadia Kajuji and Mark Drybro were cited in these charges. Nadia's mom, Deborah, was shocked by the news of William's arrest. In an interview with the Ottawa Citizen, she expressed her initial belief that she was mentally prepared for it, but when the reality came, she was taken aback. She hoped to witness William's conviction and imprisonment as a consequence of his actions. She also realized that her daughter's legacy was more important. Her primary concern was to send a strong message to online predators. She wanted them to understand that their actions would no longer be tolerated and that there was no place for these predators to operate freely and say whatever they wanted. Deborah believed that society had to take a stand against them. After William appeared in court, the judge issued an order for him to stay off the internet until his trial. This man lost his nursing license in June of 2009 and ended up becoming a long-haul trucker. It's a very different type of job, but also opens you up to a lot of opportunities to do harm as well. In August of 2010, at his preliminary hearing, his lawyers argued that he was mentally deficient at the time of the incidents, and they attacked the statute. They claimed that the law was very vague and broad, and of course, like a lot of these trials, they argued that his confession was obtained in violation of his rights, and that the charges against him violated his freedom of speech. However, the judge refused to dismiss the case, and William pleaded not guilty. Despite the charges brought against him in Minnesota, Canadian authorities decided not to press charges, believing he did not have any influence over what Nadia did. In February 2011, William Melcher Dinkle made the decision to waive his right to a trial and instead invoked a rarely utilized Minnesota law. This law grants the authority to a judge to carefully examine the prosecution's case against him. It was the judge's job, not a jury's, to determine whether William was guilty of 2 counts of assisted self-harm. After careful review, the judge reached a decision. He found William guilty on both counts. William's attorneys were disappointed and expressed their intention to file an appeal. Something very important noted in this case was the judge's powerful statement that this was not freedom of speech. He described inciting individuals to end their lives as lethal advocacy, which was excluded from First Amendment protection. In his ruling, the judge stated that William was free to publish his religious or political views on self-harm. However, he expressed that William focused his advice on vulnerable and depressed victims in a private setting. The judge emphasized that William was not simply advocating a political or moral viewpoint. In May 2011, William Melcher Dinkle was sentenced by a judge to 320 days in prison for his involvement in coaxing Mark and Nadia to end their lives. The judge imposed an additional 40 days of punishment to be served over the next 10 years. As part of the sentence, William was ordered to return to prison twice a year on the birthdays of his victims. I had never heard anything like that before, but I was not satisfied with this verdict or decision, not at all. Nadia's mom wasn't satisfied either. She wanted longer jail time. However, she acknowledged that the state did the best they could with what was available under the law. She firmly believed that the Canadian police were the first to become aware of the situation and deliberately ignored it, brushing it aside. She made it clear that she would not let this go and would always remember the police's inaction. Over the years following his conviction, William made several appeals. It wasn't even that much time, yet he was trying to appeal it, refusing to take any responsibility for his actions. In March 2014, there was a significant turning point in the case. After careful consideration, the Minnesota Supreme Court overturned William's conviction. Nadia's family, especially her brother, was devastated by this decision. They didn't think justice would ever be served, but Minnesota was still actively pursuing the case. They planned to go to the lower court again after it was thrown out to try to get a new trial. At William's second trial, the judge ruled that he had assisted in the deaths of Mark and Nadia. As a result, the judge sentenced William to 178 days in jail. William expressed his remorse, apologizing to the victims' families. He said, "I am so sorry for my actions and what I have done. I have repented." However, it was clear that these words held little meaning for most people, including Nadia's mother. A mere apology was not sufficient to demonstrate remorse. According to her, true guilt can only be proven through actions. William was released in February 2015. There was a bench made in memory of Nadia, but it had been there for nearly a decade, just rotting away. In 2019, EQ Homes, a developer of apartment homes near the bench, took the initiative to establish a permanent memorial for her, recognizing the significance of honoring Nadia's memory. Mark, Nadia's brother, became an ambassador for Your Life Counts, an organization dedicated to preventing self-harm.